The daughter shook the screen of her smartphone with the image of the cover of her novel in front of Kate. Kate, the main character of our story, a woman of retirement age, a former professor of the history department, looked around absent-mindedly. My daughter said that she waited 6 months for her new novel to come out. If Kate had known that she was about to be completely immersed in the world of this novel, she would have listened more carefully. The daughter showed her mother the main character. Her name was Delia. The girl said that her Delia was poor and lonely, but successfully fought against difficulties. Kate wasn't interested in the story of the fictional girl, not at all. Our heroine was worried about whether her daughter would come to the retirement ceremony. The daughter was outraged by her mother's inattention and replied that she didn't know. Kate felt offended, but she didn't insist. "I just asked my daughter to wear the dress that was hanging in the closet." The daughter protested, but mostly out of spite. It was an expensive item. Kate would wear this dress herself if she could, but it's impossible. Kate wanted her daughter to wear nice things. The university building looked like home, but today, Kate would be leaving it. The woman was hesitant to attend her personal retirement ceremony. Her life as a history professor ended today. Kate listened absent-mindedly to the praise addressed to her. There was only one thought pulsating in the woman's head. The woman thought absent-mindedly about what she should do next. It was time for a group photo, but the woman didn't seem to be listening to the announcer. She looked around the room and noticed a familiar figure. Jane was sitting in the front row, but surprisingly, she still came. The girl was typing on her phone, trying to solve problems with the release of her novel. The mother looked at her daughter with suspicion. This girl had come in a dress after all. Only in the evening, the boring ceremony ended. It was time to return home by bus. The mother and daughter did not look at each other as if they were strangers. The woman felt uncomfortable, so she turned to her daughter and scolded her for not ruining her eyesight. The girl continued to ignore her mother and kept typing something on her phone. The woman said louder than usual that this dress suits the girl. The girl blushed in embarrassment. She had to dress specially for this stupid ceremony. Kate looked lovingly at her daughter's confusion. While Kit was talking about her childhood, Jane continued to partially ignore her. The woman was still talking about her youth, while the girl read the manager's messages. The girl interrupted her mother's monologue, attracting her attention. Her title of Duke has just become higher than that of Baron. The woman, as a former history teacher, confirmed her words. The girl panicked, asking her mother what she should do. Kate didn't quite understand her daughter's panic. Her face contorted in bewilderment. It turns out that the girl thought that the title of Baron was higher, and that is why she wrote it that way in the novel. The woman laughed. In her opinion, this was a completely stupid mistake. The woman dismissively called Jane's novel stupid scribbles. If she made such a mistake, then what was written there anyway? The mother laughed at her daughter. Jane apparently smoked a history textbook. The girl justified herself by saying that she had asked her mother about this more than once, but Kate only reminded her of the basics of cross-checking. Jane's final excuse was that she was pressed for time, and therefore not herself. Kate decided that this was her daughter's problem. Good writers never had deadlines. According to Kate, worthy authors spend years on their works. They put their soul into them. But what Jane wrote will be forgotten in a year. Jane, being her mother's daughter, also flared up, jumping up from the bench. She pressed her lips together and proudly said that even if one person found solace in his novel, she would be happy. Jane is confident that her story will help someone in a difficult life situation. Despite her daughter's sincere words, Kate continued to laugh. The woman said that the one person would also laugh at the novel. Only a completely uneducated person could confuse a duke with a baron. And Jane, by the way, is the daughter of a history teacher. Kate asked not to talk about this. The girl tightly and nervously clutched the hated dress that she had put on, only to please her mother. The girl jumped up and started yelling at her mother, agreeing that she was a moron. Unlike Kate, she has never been so smart and knows how to make mistakes. Perhaps in this, she is very similar to her father, whose father she does not even know. The angry girl continued to yell at her mother. She will never tell anyone that she is Kate's daughter. The girl's behavior left the former history professor taken aback. Jane dropped all her things at the bus stop and ran. Kate began to make excuses, but Jane did not want to listen to her. Jane was very upset with her mother. Kate could at least console her once. Tears rolled down the girl's pale cheeks, and she called Kate a terrible mother. Her daughter's tears made Kate's heart clench. Jane quickly ran towards the roadway. Kate tried her best to stop the girl. She saw the bus approaching, The small heels of the ballet shoes tapped out the fast rhythm of running on the asphalt. Meanwhile, the traffic light was already yellow. Panic was reflected in Kate's eyes like a yellow light. She saw her daughter moving inexorably towards death. The mother rushed after her child. The traffic light turned green, and the bus started moving. The woman pushed her daughter in the back, and there was a dull thud. Jane fell to the ground, hitting her tailbone unpleasantly on the asphalt. In the first seconds, she did not understand what had happened, again starting to blame her mother. Her eyes widened in shock as she saw a sea of blood. Blood soaked the woman's dark trousers. Jane reached out to her mother's body, a look of fear never leaving her face. Everything around was covered in the woman's blood. Unfortunately, Kate was still conscious, and her feeling was joy that her daughter had survived. The dead hand reached out towards its child. The voices around her were very different from what Kate was used to. Kate's mind was filled with the thought of whether everything was okay with Jane. Once her vision focused, she discovered that the people's clothing was very old-fashioned. The sound of a spear hitting stone resounded across the square. Accusations were thrown at Keith, but she had no idea what was going on. Kate accidentally called a knight uncle, for which she received a kick to the side. Kate didn't understand something. They seem to live in a liberal democratic society, and they call her a pathetic peasant. Kate, of course, is not principled, but there is no need to shout. She hears everything perfectly well. She said sarcastically that she lay down on the square because she wanted to, and now she feels guilty. It turns out that the woman still hasn't realized that she was transported to another world and not on a movie set. The crowd was whispering. Kate was acting like a crazy person, calling for her daughter. The knight grabbed her by the chest, screaming that she was a brat who forgot who she was talking to. Kate noticed her reflection in the knight's shining armor. Her eyes widened in primal shock. Pushing the knight away and examining her hands at the same time, Kate gasped in shock. While the knights were doing something with their comrade, the woman was examining the new young hands. The woman's gaze dropped to the young golden curls. The woman felt her hands, her neck, her hair. She did not believe what had happened. Stroking her firm and soft cheeks, the woman screamed in panic. It turns out that the girl stepped on the Duke's robe, for which she was beaten. The girl immediately began to make excuses, but in principle, she doesn't understand what's going on. One of the knights grabbed the girl roughly again. She should be grateful that she stepped on the mantle of only a duke. One of the knights hissed that if the bastard baron hadn't appropriated Duke Sullivan's merits, then Sullivan would have been the baron. The knights were deeply saddened by the fate of their master. At this point, Kate didn't yet realize that she was in her daughter's book. She laughed out loud again, puffing out her chubby cheeks. People around her looked at her like she was an idiot. She decided that everyone around her had conspired. It was impossible to confuse such an obvious thing. She repeated again that the title of Duke was higher than the title of Baron, at which time the crowd froze in shock. The Baron is at the very bottom. Kate is wiping away tears of laughter. Everyone around has gone crazy. A rough voice that no longer intended to tolerate this little girl brought Kate to her senses. Even if the golden-haired one was not executed because she stepped on the mantle, she will not get away with insulting the Duke. The knights began to trample the girl, not hesitating to use the sharp heels of their boots. Heavy boots painted the light skin a yellow-purple color of bruises. The girl screamed desperately about how much pain she was in, begging at least someone for help. The Duke watched with dark joy and satisfaction as the unfortunate commoner was trampled into the stone of the square. The girl dared to look into the cold red eyes, which did not go unnoticed by the knights. She didn't have time to really turn around before heavy boots hit her again. Over time, the groans died down, and only the sounds of the heavy plates on the knight's boots remained. The girl held her breath and screamed loudly, shocking the knights with her voice. She demanded that these impudent idiots stop beating her. The knights were taken aback by the sharp sound. They froze, not understanding, looking at the girl. The girl turned to the crowd and accused the onlookers of the fact that the child was being beaten in front of everyone, and they were silently watching. She just stepped on the Duke's robe, and already she is being punished as if she had killed a man. She pointed at them with a graceful finger. The rude onlookers did not dare stop the beating of an innocent child. Yes, they really can't help the person they're beating, but standing there like a pillar and watching is no fun. The girl turned her anger onto the Duke, who, in her opinion, was an uneducated and uncouth boor. It seemed that the girl stepping on his hem had seriously hurt his fragile male ego. so he silently watched as his subordinates started causing trouble. Literally thrusting a sharp nail into Duke Delia's chest, she demanded that he behave appropriately and not bully adults. The knight's jaws dropped to the ground at the girl's insolence, and some breathed their last. Having silenced everyone, the girl turned her back to the crowd, the Duke and the knights proudly straightening her back. With a polite wish, the girl ran away before the knights could recover from their shock. The captain of the knights ordered to catch the impudent girl, rudely pointing his finger at her. The Duke stopped his guard. They were late for a meeting. There was no point in chasing a poor child around the city. The knights began to argue with their master. If they left everything like this, it could harm his reputation. The Duke ignored the words of his minions and calmly ordered them to follow him. The girl, hiding behind one of the houses, finally began to catch her breath. She remembered the halberd in the hands of the captain of the guard. How good it was that they didn't kill her. The girl ran her hand over her face, feeling the moisture on her chin. When she looked at her hand, she noticed drops of blood that had been wiped off her face. She closed her eyes. Now it dawned on her how much her entire fragile body was aching. During the beating by the knights, the girl almost bit off her tongue. Now her mouth is filled with blood. In the reflection, Kate noticed that she looked completely different. She was not just out of her mind, she was in a different body. It was obvious that after the retirement ceremony was over, she got into an accident while saving her daughter and died. She found herself in this world as a child, a vaguely familiar face reflected in a puddle. Looking at her new face, Kate hoped that this was all a dream, so vivid and realistic that she even felt pain. The sound came from the girl's back. It was not a dream at all. The thin spikelet announced to her. The golden-haired girl noticed two little angels holding hands tightly. The children bowed joyfully and greeted the girl, calling her by the name Delia. The girl was stunned, wondering how this could have happened, that she found herself in the wrong body. The little angels began to tell the newcomer the story of the character in whose guise she found herself. Delia is a poor girl who was abandoned in a stable one cold winter night. The baby survived on the streets, eating scraps and stealing from an early age. She is a child whose life is one continuous running and wandering. She is a poor orphan. The angels told the new Delia in detail the story of her growing up and childhood. Today, it so happened that the rebel Delia got into trouble in the square by stepping on Duke Sullivan's robe. The memory of what happened in the square today sent a herd of goosebumps down the girl's back. One of the angels suggested that the girl step on the baron's robe and the ruler's robe. Delia turned away, looking down in embarrassment. The angels told me that it would be very difficult for Delia to survive in this world. She could die at any moment. The girl bared her teeth at this prospect, wondering what the hell had brought her here. Sighing sadly, one of the little angels wiped away his non-existent tears. Wherever Delia goes, there is no place where she is not driven away. Poor little orphan Delia. How hard it is for her to live in this world full of darkness and evil. Dresses embroidered with gold and precious stones, jewelry and money. All this usually goes to the heroines at the end of the story. But not Delia. This can never be her destiny. She is not the character who eventually finds happiness. On the right, an angel attacked the girl, screaming that she was a poor orphan. Another angel came at her from the left, saying that she was a clumsy loser and a rebel. From the entire long triad of angels, Delia squeezed out only one important thing. She must not approach the young man with scarlet eyes. Just as unexpectedly and quickly as they appeared, the angels left the girl, quite recently, without any questions. The girl was taken aback by the movement. She wanted to catch up with the angels, but they disappeared. After saying her new name a few times, Kate remembered who Delia was. The woman recalled how her daughter talked about the main character of her novel. Delia is a girl with a beautiful appearance, a sharp mind, who attracts the attention of handsome men. Kate remembered the conversation about barons and dukes at the bus stop. The moment when Jane bragged about how her novel was published and had a beautiful cover. Before Kate's eyes appeared the very cover of the novel, on which Delia was depicted. And now she. As soon as Delia realized where she had ended up, a cry from the Duke's guards was heard from the side. One of the townspeople showed in which direction the girl ran, and the knights immediately went in that direction. Delia immediately started running, if she was caught. Then that was it, sionk, as they say. Boots tapped out a quick beat along the townspeople's paths. The knights searched all the alleys and shops. The girl's heart was beating wildly. She urgently needed to hide somewhere again. Suddenly, a black-gloved sleeve covered her mouth and pulled it aside. Delia thought about biting the stranger, but decided to hold off on it. Behind the mask hid a guy with snow-white hair and pale but plump lips. To prevent the girl's labored breathing from giving them away, the stranger covered her nose. The guy put his finger to his lips and gestured for the girl to be quiet. The young man looked into the girl's eyes, asking her to be patient for a little while. The knights would leave, and he would let her go. The cries and tramp of the knights gradually faded away. They lost their way and headed in the opposite direction from them. The girl caught the scent of vanilla from the stranger's glove, which puzzled her greatly. The night guards, as expected, ran past the corner where Delia and the stranger were hiding. The guy finally let go of the girl, and for the first time in those minutes, she took a deep breath. Delia stamped her foot indignantly and began to attack the impudent guy, who simply apologized. The girl calmed down a little and, relaxing her eyebrows, thanked the young man for his help. The young man pulled the mask over his face and blinked a couple of times in confusion. So, the one who runs away is him, and Delia has nothing to thank him for. The girl was also surprised. They were looking for her. Although, if you take a closer look at the unfamiliar guy and his clothes, he really does look suspicious. Delia realized she had just met a real thief. The girl immediately called out to the fleeing young man, demanding that he tell her what he had stolen. Looking down at the girl, the thief tilted his head to his right shoulder in confusion. According to him, he only steals girls' hearts. And after these words, the bag on his back takes on a different meaning. The girl looked at the young man with fascination, wondering if her heart was now in his bag. The guy disappeared as suddenly as he appeared, leaving behind a bunch of questions. It's hard to believe she really is in Jane's novel. Walking through the square, the little girl was thinking about what she should call this place. The girl walked past an apple seller. One of the customers was arguing with the woman, but she didn't care. In any case, the first priority will be to find out what happened to Delia in this reality. Delia wonders if everything is okay with Jane. She hopes not to change her romance too much. Kate remembers her investments, insurance, and pension, which Jane can live on in her absence. Deli noticed the fallen apple and pointed it out to the man, but he simply waved it away. As Delia watched the man leave, she thought about her daughter, worrying about how she would live on. She hopes that Jane will be completely okay and is very sorry for her actions. She would never have thought that the last thing she would say to her daughter would be harsh words about her incapacity. So Kate mentally sends a message to her daughter not to take her words to heart. The chapter is full of regrets and questions, but unfortunately, everything has already happened and time cannot be turned back. In any case, she needs to think positively. There is nothing to do after retirement anyway. In any case, it's better to be on the verge of death than to fool around at home. Moreover, she is young now, so she has both strength and appetite. Her whole body is now bursting with vital energy, and now even a simple apple puts her in a good mood. She didn't even know she could feel this good again. She decided, despite everything, to enjoy her new youth. However, first she needs to find out what this place is. It looks very much like medieval Europe. First of all, the language, Korean, is understood here without any problems, and she also perceives everything by ear very well. Secondly, her appearance. She and everyone around her look like true Europeans. There are no magnificent buildings in this area. Apparently, this is a settlement of common people. Judging by the style of the buildings and the clothes of the people, it is somewhere between the Middle Ages and modern times, most likely a feudal system. And in any case, Delia is an orphan, with no clothes, no food, no shelter. Well, it can't be that bad. Delia must have at least some coin. Out of desperation, the girl began to rub her neck, a bad habit left over from her past life. Taking one last look at the surrounding area to confirm his conclusions, she found some kind of wooden pendant on herself, a completely unremarkable little thing. Basically, nothing that could be sold for any money. And to be born during the feudal system as a person from the lower classes is a huge misfortune. Still, fate was completely merciless and harsh. She called the first townsman she came across, politely addressing him with an excuse. Without even thinking that it would be strange, the girl asked where she was. This made the townsman very taken aback and think that the girls had clearly flown hard the last time in the square. Delia was scared that she had said something too wrong. And then I thought that, actually, it really does look stupid and strange that someone asks you where you are in the middle of the day. In this case, she decided to act cunningly and approached the man who was calmly smoking on the bench. She attracted the attention of the smoking man and pestered him with questions. She pretended that she couldn't count, so she asked what year it was 15 years ago. The man thought, since it was now the year 351, according to the imperial calendar, 15 years ago it would have been approximately the year 336. It turns out that this is not a European calendar, and in order to smooth things over, the girl admired the man's intelligence. The girl began by saying that if this man is very smart, then he understands our politics, to which she received a positive response. The girl asked him about what was happening in neighboring countries, and the man became interested in which of the strange ones she was speaking. The girl answered without thinking from above. It turned out that to the north is the country of Gloria. In Gloria, all they do is make noise. Now they have crossed the border of the Imperium. Delia concluded that this country is called the Imperium, and since people are moving here, the circumstances here are much more pleasant than in other countries. It turns out that people try to come to the capital of this country by any means possible. After all, this is a fairly large country. Society here is in disarray, and unemployment is thriving. And here it is, a feeling of hostility. There is no point in asking this man any more questions. He will only speak his opinion from now on. She decided to ask the last question. The man was already starting to get irritated. This question interested Delia most of all. Where could a poor thing like her earn money? The townsman laughed. He realized that the girl had no interest in listening to his words. Then she asked him about this and that, which as such has no meaning. The man shouted loudly that she was not a sealed emigrant and the knights should seize her. Escaping from the guards for the second time that short day, Delia strenuously denied that she was a visitor. Hiding behind a corner again, this time not beaten, the girl caught her breath. She heard girls like her calling on townspeople to buy flowers. She ran out into a completely different square, into a different part of the city. Most likely, she ended up in a rich area. Girls, women, men are all dressed richly here. Everyone is discussing the latest news, completely ignoring the little vendors. Delia realized that this place would allow her to earn at least some small money. The girl found herself right in the center of a noisy crowd. Compared to the street she was on, you can make some good money here. She decided to look for work here. Delia selflessly went to look for earnings. She took a closer look at what the girls were doing. They were persuading the noble ladies to buy flowers. The girl saw how brazenly little girls were extorting money for flowers. Delia's eyes lit up. This was a creative economy with no startup capital, which was ideal for her situation. Delia overheard the girls discussing the place where the flowers they sell grow. The golden-haired girl followed the two girls. A field filled with flowers appeared under the girl's eyes. The flowers were fresh and beautiful, with large buds. Strangers' girls were discussing how this winter there was a risk that the flowers would not bloom. Although their panic was unnecessary, not once in many years has this field remained bare. Delia approached the girls, greeted them kindly, and began asking them about selling flowers. The strangers turned their attention to her, becoming interested in her words. However, Delia was unable to hold their attention for long. The strangers returned to collecting flowers. The girl sat down next to them, continuing to insist on conversation. She tried to find out the price of one flower. She reached for the flowers, wondering which of these flowers were the best-selling, which outraged the girls. They roughly pushed the golden-haired girl away. It turns out that there is a whole war between the girls over the flower plots. Delia didn't understand at first why the girls were pushing her away. In her opinion, there were enough flowers here for everyone. In a rather unpleasant manner, the girls explained that this was their plot, and the flowers from it were also theirs, and that Delia should go and pick them somewhere else. Delia did not mince words after such rude treatment of her. She was very upset. Mentally, she was 60, and it was not right for her to fight with children at that age. For the first time all day, Delia was distracted from her thoughts by a soft voice filled with goodwill. The girl with dark hair said that there were more flowers behind the front gate than here, and that they could be picked too. Nobody goes there because it is quite far from the square. She is just going there, and she is bored alone. Delia, without turning around at the voice, asked if they were really ready to take her with them. The dark-haired girl was a little taken aback by such a reaction to her words. It turns out that Delia is already afraid to approach anyone in this country. Everyone is chasing her away. The girl assumed that Delia was a visitor because she had never seen her before, and she lent her a beautiful basket. At last, Some hope for a brighter future was born in Delia's soul. She introduced herself and learned that her new friend's name was Bellucci. The girls shook hands and headed to the main gate. Pay attention to the name of the new acquaintance. Delia assumed that she was from Italy. But Italy does not exist here, so the question was stupid. The girls collected 2 large baskets of flowers, wished each other a successful sale, and ran away. Already among the crowd, Delia realized that there were plenty of competitors to her business. A huge number of poor girls tried to sell flowers. The girls brazenly dumped flowers into the hands of noble ladies, persuading them to buy them. But of course, there were no buyers. Delia decided to act differently. She called out to one of the ladies, who immediately clarified that she did not intend to buy anything. However, the girl surprised her by not just trying to push flowers on her, but by paying attention to the dress. This approach greatly surprised the noble woman, and she stopped in front of Delia. The girl said that the flower matched the girl's beautiful dress very well. With the addition of the rose, the dress really blossomed into new colors. The flower woven into the dress is called service. Delia's charisma won the client's sympathy. The woman agreed to buy 5 buds, which made the golden-haired girl very happy. She was already imagining how the coins would weigh down her empty pockets. However, the question about the price confused her. She froze, not knowing what to answer. She could only draw out a couple of vowel sounds, awkwardly looking into the customer's eyes. She doesn't know prices, doesn't know currency, and has no idea how much other girls sell flowers for. She started her song again about how she couldn't count and asked for time to think. Delia decided that she would act according to the situation and look at the customer's gaze. It turned out that the buyer herself was not aware of the prices of flowers. Delia assumed it was 1, but she didn't expect there to be different coins, so she had to ask for as many as they would give her. While Delia was hesitating over the price, a price was announced from behind her. 1 bud cost 5 ferrums. The girl who agreed to buy the flower was immediately attacked by all the other girls. Delia tried to push her way through the underage crowd, but she wasn't bold enough. She tried to shout to her colleagues, but her voice went unnoticed. The girls continued to pull the buds towards the customer she had attracted. Delia quickly realized that she had nothing to gain here now. Her clients would simply be taken away. The girl cursed and left the square upset. How can I look Bellucci in the eyes now? What was she thinking when she took up trading without knowing the prices? But now she knows that 1 flower costs 5 ferrums, which are just iron coins that have a rather low value. Delia noticed that everything around her was called in Latin, for which she praised her daughter. An important thought lit up the girl's head. Where should she spend the night? She had to earn enough money to open an inn. Selling flowers is clearly not an option, because anyone can easily pick flowers and sell them, but she cannot sell anything else. She needs some different tactics, and just in time, she came across an abandoned barn. The abandoned, unfinished building looked creepy and ominous, but at the same time, it attracted attention. Delia decided that she would clean it up, and it would be a great place to spend the night. Inside, she found clothes that had clearly been abandoned there recently. She came up with a brilliant idea on how to make money in a way that no one else would repeat her tactics. She smiled slyly. By the evening, she would already have a whole bag of money. Meanwhile, the girls with flowers were crying in the corner of the square. Sales were not going well at all. For some reason, all the ladies were running to a certain place. They were in a hurry. The women discussed how someone was working and would finish the work when the flowers withered. The girls caught the word flowers and followed to find out what was going on. Since the noble ladies were talking about flowers, then this is their topic. They urgently need to find out what is going on there. They barely managed to catch up with the restless ladies and began to watch the crowd from the side. A huge crowd of people formed near the old barn. Everyone wanted to get to this place as soon as possible. The girls looked around the crowd indignantly, and it was certain that some tent had gathered all their clients around it. They found Bellucci talking to the ladies near the entrance to the barn. The girls called out to Bellucci, but she either didn't hear or ignored them, continuing to deal with the crowd. The dark-haired girl invited another lady into the tent. The crowd surrounded the girl as she came out, wondering if the rumors were true. The one who came out without words showed that the rumors were indeed true. The women present in the crowd gasped in admiration. One of the ladies, rather skeptical, entered the tent and was warned that it was better to leave the money inside. The rich lady pulled back the curtains at the entrance to the tent and looked inside. An interesting picture appeared before her, which made her feel a little horrified. Various flowers were laid out on the table, from simple wildflowers to roses. At the table itself sat a woman, dressed from head to toe in a cloak. A little earlier, Delia came to Bellucci with a great idea, but saw her friend crying. She immediately became concerned about the girl's condition and imagined all the worst possible things. Delia dropped everything she had in her hands and rushed to help her friend. She ran to the crying girl and hugged her, asking what happened. Bellucci cried, "Because you could only sell 2 flowers today. She earned very little money, and so she will get it from her mother when she gets home." Delia began to introduce Bellucci to her idea for making money. Delia said that she would build a tent here now, and if she did, they would make much more money than they could by selling flowers. The golden-haired girl asked Bellucci to help her realize her idea. Bellucci looked at her friend with slight distrust, but nodded in agreement. The girls finished building the tent, and together they did it much faster than expected. The friends looked proudly at the construction that they had spent a couple of hours on. Delia put on gloves in front of her friend, which surprised her very much, because it is too hot for gloves now. Bellucci didn't understand what the golden-haired girl was up to. She worriedly said that she needed to earn more money before the sun went down, and not do all this. Delia interrupted Bellucci, calming her down. She started from afar, asking why people needed gloves. Well, in general, gloves are needed to protect yourself from the cold. On the other hand, when someone is working with a dangerous object or during fights, gloves protect the hands. And usually noble ladies wear gloves, not for protection, but for beauty. The golden-haired girl happily patted Bellucci on the head, who shared all her knowledge about gloves. It dawned on Bellucci that Delia was about to do something dangerous, and the golden-haired girl was also wrapped in some kind of tarpaulin. And to secure the scarf on the girl's head, they used Delia's wooden pendant. Delia asked if it was true that Bellucci only sold flowers and did not work anywhere else. The golden-haired woman said that her friend usually eats little and is weak most of the time. It turns out that you can learn a lot about a person's life from their palm, from their gender and age to their health and profession. Delia began to explain her conclusions about Bellucci's hands. The surface of her nails is uneven. This is a sign of a lack of protein, which means she is not eating well. Hands can tell a lot about a person, but not only hands are informative. Body type, intonation, appearance, and gait also provide information. And on top of everything else, people can tell everything without even realizing it. This information may be taboo, and now Delia looks like a grown-up granny. Bellucci was taken aback and surprised by how her friend's appearance had changed. The golden-haired one announced that from now on, she was an adult with magical powers. Bellucci must now go out into the street and take a good look at the people, find the one who is dressed the most beautifully, but with the most gloomy expression on her face, and if Bellucci says the right words, then he will certainly follow her. The girl followed all the instructions of her friend. She really found a woman who was sitting very depressed. Bellucci declared that she meant an outstanding fortune teller who could accurately predict anything. The girl was surprised that she only needed to bring one person. Could one woman really pay so much? But it's not about paying one woman. She'll spread the word and clients will come running. And indeed, word of mouth began to work. The rich lady told her friends about her. She was very worried about the future. Her child was finishing the academy, and after the fortune teller's words, she calmed down. As expected, despite her friend's skepticism, she would be interested in this. The noble ladies were indeed interested in the services of the outstanding fortune teller. Rumors spread faster than the plague, and in this case, that's to your advantage. Looking at what is happening now, Bellucci is convinced that Delia was indeed right. Fortune tellers don't usually come to this city, so it's surprising that she decided to visit. When asked where the fortune teller came from, Delia replied that those who possess magical powers do not remember the places they wander through. The woman was still skeptical about this. She laughed at the fortune teller and wondered where the magical power came from. This woman continued to babble a lot of unnecessary things, as if she was testing the abilities of a fortune teller. Perhaps she is simply unable to remain silent. The air here is not very strong, and I wanted to kick this guest out as quickly as possible. And the woman was talking about her own. Delia drew attention to the ring that was on the guest's finger. The ring is quite thin, clearly expensive. This is a gimel ring, which is a high-class engagement ring that was popular among medieval aristocrats. Their peculiarity is that 3 of these rings can form one. Traditionally, each ring belongs to one of 3 people. One necessarily goes to the groom, The second goes to the bride. And the last third ring is kept by the witness until the wedding itself. At the future wedding, the groom places all 3 rings on the bride, which symbolizes the unity of the couple. Delia thought of something she could tell the woman and began to tell fortunes with flowers. If the guest was interested, she could put money in the box. The guest's new surprise prediction came. Although she didn't even seem to say anything, she decided that she was right. The fortune teller really was a fraud, and there was no magical power. With one phrase, Delia drew the girl's attention to herself. Among the people who were hastily raising a toast, there was no one who understood the broken heart. It hit the guest's will hard. Very vows, all 3 will shed tears. 2 of them tears of happiness, hinting at the future wedding, the girl said. And the remaining third will be left to choke in bitter tears of disappointment and loneliness. The noble lady pressed her hand with the ring to her chest in shock. No one could know about it. Delia said with a grin that knowing what others don't know is magic power. The woman was angry that Delia had read her like an open book. The golden-haired one noted that it is important to be sure that it is dangerous to wear things all the time, unless they want to lose them on purpose. The fortune teller's client is a witness to a wedding she does not want. The fortune teller suggested that the reluctance to marry was connected with the man's infidelity. It turns out that Delia was the first to guess about this ring, although for the girl herself, the reason was obvious. The fortune teller invited the girl to sit down, since she had already interested her. The fortune teller agreed to listen to the guest's full story and give advice. The guest began her story. Her sister Mila is 2 years older than her, and they have always had a warm relationship. Mila had been close friends with the groom since childhood. They grew up together, and later, when they grew up, they were still close. They were in love with each other. But one day, an old duke, seeing Mila's portrait, proposed to her. Mila was radically against this marriage, so she quickly refused without even thinking. But the father, not paying attention, decided to hold the wedding ceremony. But on the wedding day, the sister disappeared along with the groom. Although the disappearance was reported everywhere, the girl was never found, and it was decided that she had committed suicide. The only one who did not give up was the girl who came to the fortune teller. She found her older sister in a hut on the sea coast. As soon as Mila saw her younger sister, she came out and burst into tears with words of apology, followed, unsurprisingly, by the groom, holding a small box in his hands. Konyu said that they would soon have a lavish wedding and asked him to be their best man. Out of anger, the girl already wanted to leave this hut, but her sister, crying, held her back and said that a child would soon be born. Out of desperation, the girl agreed to become a witness. She does not believe that she has the right to be angry with her sister, so she came to the fortune teller for advice. Delia asked if the guest had told her parents that her sister had been found. After hearing the whole story, the golden-haired one ordered the girl to put her hand on the box. The prediction was determined. The fortune teller said that there is no need to ruin the fate of others. The guest should simply watch from the side. The guest considered the fortune teller's words nonsense and began to shout angrily at her. According to the girl, her sister is also the daughter of a viscount. She has always received everything of the highest quality, and she cannot continue to live in poverty. The golden-haired girl knew what to answer. Why then didn't the girl take her with her? If the girl had really been against her sister's wedding, she would have gotten rid of the ring long ago. If she really wanted to take her sister with her, she would have told her parents everything. If she really hated her fiancé, she could have taught him a lesson with the help of outsiders. But she didn't do that, which means that deep down she agrees with her sister's choice. The fortune teller understood the woman's concern about her sister. She gently ran her hand over the guest's palm, finally calming the girl down. It's really hard when you can't tell anyone about your feelings. Even if from the outside it seems like a road to hell, for a specific person, it can be heaven. If a girl really thinks it's terrible, she can easily help her sister. But Mila's choice should be respected. This is the only way she can find peace for herself. The crowd was getting noisier and noisier outside the fortune-telling tent. She quickly identified the man with strong arms and build, as well as a stubborn demeanor, as a military man. An elderly man, who was truly blessed by fate, had problems with his children. And the talkative woman, who immediately told herself everything, was surprised that the golden-haired woman quickly understood about her problems with her husband. She answered her visitors' questions again and again, arguing that her ability was based on magical power. Each time she suggested placing a hand on the magic box, and saying what the guests would like to know from the future. Although the eras have changed many times within the long history, the life of people is not much different. The soldier gave up his place to a colleague, missing his chance for promotion, and he wonders if he did the right thing. The elderly man was worried that his daughter was wandering around the world. He was afraid that something could happen to him, and everyone calls the woman's husband a bad person and advises her to get a divorce. She is not sure whether it is worth continuing to live in marriage with him. With her mysterious magical power, the golden-haired one foresees the future that is written on the flower, although she simply knows the habits of people. People worry about things that haven't happened yet and suffer when they try to catch a bird in the sky. The advice to the soldier was that he should not interfere in this matter and give in. Next time he would have a better chance. She realized that the elderly man's house was strictly regulated, which is why his daughter ran away. The woman knew perfectly well that her husband was cheating on her, but thanks to the conversation with the golden-haired man, her heart fell into place. Even if the girl didn't really see the future, every problem has a solution. Delia immediately realized that the main reason people came to her was to be listened to and to receive comfort. She can comfort and speak politely to strangers, listening to them and supporting them, but she was unable to support her own daughter. Listen to her at the right moment. A familiar voice called out to the fortune teller from behind. A skeptical male gaze fixed on the back of her head. The girl quickly straightened the flowers, looking up at the young man. She began her song again about how, with her magical power, she could foresee the future written on the flower. Judging by his voice and stately shadows, the fortune teller assumed that the man was looking for true love or eternal glory. The man looked rich, but not very flamboyant, and was most likely dressed in a simple uniform. The fortune teller finally raised her eyes to the man who had arrived, looking him over from head to toe. The face of the Duke appeared before her at the moment when she had stepped in that morning. Delia was not expecting this kind of guest in her tent at all. He made her scared. The Duke asked what this mysterious magical power was that allowed the girl to see the future. A cold feeling ran down the fortune teller's back. She doesn't want to see this Duke. Fortune-telling works only if it is filled with a cherished desire to know the future, the fortune teller said. The Duke did not react to Delia's comments, continuing to sit silently in his place. Delia wanted to get rid of the unwanted company as soon as possible, so she hurried to end the conversation. She wanted to say that the fortune-telling was over and the Duke could go, but she was interrupted. The Duke pulled the cloak off the girl, looking down at her. The girl, speechless, looked into the man's eyes. The man, in principle, did not expect to see a little girl in place of the wise fortune-teller. The knight ran into the hut. It turns out that in order to conduct business on the square, you need permission from the administration. The Duke and the knight began to discuss the girl. They did not particularly remember her. Delia realized that they had not come here to find out their fate, so she asked what they wanted. The Duke said that permission was a prerequisite for doing business in this area. If they go to the department now and write a statement, they will be given permission to conduct the case without any problems. Delia didn't know about such formalities. She promised to fold the tent now. Recognition lit up the knight's eyes as the girl gathered her things. The guard recognized Delia as the girl who had stepped on the Duke's robe that afternoon. Cold sweat ran even faster down the girl's back. She was greatly frightened by the knight's words. She turned away and began to deny everything, and at that moment the knight was convinced that she was the culprit. This is indeed the commoner that keeps catching my eye, and it is suspicious. The Duke decided that the girl must be taken with him for further showdowns. Delia approached Bellucci with a question about whether she was a good runner. This question caught the dark-haired girl off guard. She, of course, runs well. The guards decided to seize the girl again to get even with her, and the girls once again had to run away from the square. While the knights were catching the little one, who was running away from them like a mouse, the Duke stood silently to the side. Something caught the red-eyed man's attention, and he dropped down. On the ground lay Delia's pendant, which she had dropped during her escape. Sullivan picked up the wooden pendant. The man looked closely at the decoration. Most likely he understood something. Delia is already running away from these knights once again. She is already tired. Bellucci admired her friend's speed, to which the golden-haired girl replied that it was just a way to survive. The thought, like an arrow, pierced the girl's head. She couldn't feel the bag of money on her. She jumped up screaming. She forgot her bag in the square, a whole bag of money. One went crazy. Everything went down the drain. She worked all day and everything went to hell. Bellucci took a heavy bag out of her bosom and handed it to her friend. She took it when the golden-haired man grabbed her hand because she was afraid that the people would take it away from them. Delia hugged Bellucci tightly. Their money was there. It was such a joy. She gave her friend a cute nickname and never stopped praising her. The modest brunette only laughed sweetly in response, glad that she had been of some use. They earned 2 aurum and 803 ferrum, a rather successful sortie. As expected, gold, silver, copper, and iron are the local monetary units. 1 coin of high value is worth 10 coins of low value. This is not so different from the way money is counted in reality, but gold, if counted separately, would be worth more than 10 silvers. The girls were distracted from counting the money by other poor girls who surrounded them. Delia was already afraid that the angry mob would take away their earnings, but they only apologized for driving them out of the territory and taking away the buyer. It turns out that if they don't sell flowers, they will starve. So they were in a hurry, and that's why it happened. The girls burst into tears, asking to be taught how to sell skillfully as well. They promised to do everything that Delia ordered. When the old woman inside Delia looked at the unfortunate children, she couldn't pass by. The golden-haired girl asked where in this city the restaurant with the most delicious food was. They were not greeted joyfully at the restaurant itself, although the girls themselves were afraid to go inside. Delia asked the host for a table for 7 people, to which the waitress gave them a skeptical look. Delia hastened to reassure the woman that they had money and suggested setting up several tables separately. The nasty woman accused the golden-haired woman of simply stealing the money. She wouldn't make that kind of money just by selling flowers, so she wouldn't serve thieves. Everyone in this area is well aware of the situation these girls are in. The attention of the other chairman was drawn to the shout of the host and the panicked sighs of the girls. They will not be able to enjoy beautiful and tasty food prepared from expensive products. Children living on pennies will never have the money to go to an elite institution. The hostess began to chase the girls away, threatening to call security and the Knight's Guard. The woman called the second waitress to call security, and the girls pulled Delia towards the exit. The golden-haired girl couldn't even imagine that if you were a commoner, no matter how much you worked as a farmhand, everyone would think you were a thief. The people around watched the unfolding scene intently, wondering how it would all end. Delia looked up and looked straight at the waitress. Well, this money was not stolen. This information shocked the woman, who demanded proof. The golden-haired one came up with a way to get out of this situation, once again using her surroundings. Of course, this money was donated by one of the noble ladies dining here. Dilyara turned around and bowed to the unfamiliar woman, sensually thanking her. The woman tried to deny it because she had never donated money to charity. But Delia didn't give her time to come to her senses and ordered the other girls to thank her quickly. A crowd of poor girls began to thank the woman sitting quietly at the table. The lady kept trying to translate the opinion of those around her into that it was a mistake, but it was too late. Everyone was amazed that she was helping poor children, and her reputation rose. Seeing the positive reaction of those around her, the lady let things slide. Amid cries of admiration for her modesty, she wished the girls bon appetit. That's it. The noble lady confirmed that the money was not stolen, but donated. Delia gave the signal to the other girls to order whatever they wanted. While the girls were discussing what they would order, a suspicious stranger was watching them. After the meal, the girls thanked Delia for the treat and sales advice. The golden-haired girl demanded that the other girls extend their open palms to her. The girls who didn't understand fulfilled the request of their main friend. Delia gave them some money, asking them to save it for a rainy day. In any case, there will be days when they will not be able to sell a single flower. It is for this case that she gives them money, so that they don't cry anymore. And she didn't forget about Bellucci, giving her more than the others. The brunette found herself holding 2 gold coins in her hands. She got scared and began to refuse such a handout. Delia refused to take the money back, calling it gratitude for her help. This greatly shocked Bellucci, who was not used to being treated kindly. As she was leaving, the golden-haired garden asked the girls to hurry home because their parents would be worried. The squad of commoners did not take their eyes off their departing friend. They decided that the golden-haired one reminded them very much of their grandmothers, just as kind and wise. Bellucci walked home, once again replaying Delia's words in her head. Even if the flowers don't sell within a few days, with the money the golden-haired girl gave her, Bellucci will even be able to save up some money. She hid the money she received deep in her pockets. She won't cry tomorrow. The girl cautiously looked into the room where she lived with her mother. She encountered a very unexpected guest, as always, and came home at the wrong time. The man looked at the little girl in shock. He didn't expect to see her here either. The man asked the girl's mother who the girl was, and Bella called her daughter a servant. The man was surprised that the woman had a maid, and Bella hurried the man. She needed to go to the banquet. The man was surprised that the woman was going to a banquet in honor of Count Martini's birthday, but she didn't care. Cursing the woman, the man left, slamming the door loudly. In fact, he would cross over in 2 days. The girl asked, upset, if she was really just a servant for her mother. Bella replied that he asked her not to come in when she had clients. She could lose her job if her child was revealed. The girl awkwardly clutched her apron. The mother ignored her daughter's condition and demanded that she give her the money. When Bellucci poured 2 coins into her mother's palm, she was very upset. The woman caught a pleasant smell from her daughter, and she realized that Bellucci had eaten meat. The girl naively confessed to her mother that she was glad that someone had paid attention to her. Bellucci boasted that she went to the biggest restaurant today. In response to her daughter's words, the woman irritably fingered her bracelets. She also knows this restaurant, but has never been there. Bella stroked her daughter deceptively gently as she admired the delicious food. But the affection was deceptive. The woman roughly grabbed her daughter by the hair and pulled her up. Bella sells her body in a dirty den, and Bellucci dares to eat delicious food at this time. She told her to come back with the money. They go and eat meat. The woman decided that the girl hid the money. Bellucci began to make excuses, and her friend treated her to something, which her mother did not believe. While she was fighting with her own mother, gold coins fell out of her apron. The woman saw this money and immediately lost all interest in the child. Gold coins mixed with silver ones glittered enticingly on the floor. Some friend fed Bellucci and gave her money. A wonderful girl. The woman swung and hit her daughter hard in the face. She doesn't care about her own daughter. While the girl lay on the cold, hard stone, the mother calmly took the money. The woman decided that Bellucci had only learned bad things on the street, and how could she have done otherwise with her mother being a prostitute? The woman will be back tomorrow, so the girl should wash everything before she arrives and clean up. And it doesn't matter to her whether she steals money or gets involved with men on the street. But the girl shouldn't lie to her. Most of all, she hates people who lie, although she herself is a liar and a fallen woman. Meanwhile, Delia came to the inn. They wanted to take 400 iron coins from her, but the girl asked for a discount. When they agreed to a price of 300 iron coins, the girl realized that she had no money. She completely forgot to put aside money for a place to stay, and it was quite cold at night. She will have to give up flower fortune-telling because she took the children's job, and she needs to get a work permit. Maybe she needs to find another way to earn money. In reality, earning it was also not easy. It was very hot during the day and unbearably cold at night, and, as luck would have it, there wasn't even a hut nearby. And what about tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow? The girl thought as she fell asleep. However, without money, it is impossible to solve the problem of clothing, food, and housing. She never thought that she would experience the evil of the class system on her own skin. Gradually, the girl woke up from a familiar voice calling her mother. She will never confuse this voice with anything. She knows it better than her own. As soon as the girl realized who was calling her, she raised her head and stared at the moon. It was Jane who managed to find a way to contact her mother. Delia realized that it was her daughter Jane calling her. The woman became worried about her daughter and bombarded her with questions about whether she was okay, whether she had eaten, and where she was speaking from. Jane replied that she was fine, but now she had to worry about how Delia would live on. Delia indignantly declared that this was all she could think about. The girl said that the only good thing about her situation was that she looked younger, but she absolutely did not understand what was happening. Jane told her mother that this was the entire content of her novel, and that she had tried very hard to write it. Delia agreed that the novel was good, but again reminded her daughter that she had really screwed up by putting the Baron above the Duke. Delia didn't like the fact that the main character was from a lower class. It would have been much easier for her if she had been of noble birth. Jane abruptly interrupted her mother's outpouring and asked if the pendant was safe. Delia was outraged that her daughter again didn't want to listen to her problems at all. Delia suddenly discovered that the pendant was indeed no longer in its permanent place. The woman remembered everything that happened to her in the tent. Fearing that she would actually be found guilty in front of Jane, Delia hid the loss of the pendant from her daughter. Jane described the virtues of the pendant and said that it was unremarkable in appearance, but in fact it had wonderful properties. The daughter asked her mother to listen to her very carefully. She tried to give her some hints and make life easier in the novel. Jane explained that the pendant knew why her mother ended up in that world and what she should do now. According to her daughter, Delia was supposed to shine moonlight on the back of the pendant during the full moon. Jane explained that the front side is the one with the ornaments, and the other side needs to be illuminated. The daughter declared that this was all she could do to help her mother, and Jane's voice became faint and unintelligible. The girl tried to warn her mother about something else concerning the suspension, but it became completely impossible to make out the words. In vain did the mother shout her daughter's name, trying to reach her across time and space. A huge moon looked down at Delia from the sky, and her daughter's voice fell silent. The rain beat down mercilessly on Delia's face and body, drowning out her cries for her daughter. The door behind Delia swung open, and a very indignant male voice asked her not to shout so loudly and to let him sleep peacefully. Delia turned around and saw a very nice young man, about 20 years old. The young man looked in surprise at the incredible stranger who had woken him up. The boy grabbed Delia and pulled her through the door, calling her an angel who had come down from heaven to light his way. Some time later, the young people were sitting at a table in a rather poor room with 2 cups of tea. The young man apologized for his spontaneous behavior and explained that an angel with the same golden hair as the girl had simply come to him in a dream. The owner of the room explained that this angel was his inspiration, and for several years he created under the influence of this angel. The young man was very inspired and excited, declaring that their meeting was fateful. Jane tried to listen attentively to the incoherent speech of her new acquaintance and understood that she did not have to answer at all. He would still chatter. Jane thought about her problems. She felt better knowing that her daughter was doing well, but it was a pity that the conversation was so short. Suddenly, Jane remembered the pendant and panicked. She had lost it, most likely in the tent. The woman calmed herself with the thought that it was useless to go look for the missing item now. It was dark anyway. Jane remembered that she had not met the young man and asked what his name was. The owner of the room replied that his name was Marcel and asked the name of his guest. The woman replied that her name was Delia, and her name delighted the young man, as did her appearance. Marcel asked why Delia was walking down the street at such a late hour and in the rain, and offered to walk the girl home. Delia replied that she had no home and no one to take her to. Marcel was outraged that Delia was sleeping in the open air. It was very cold outside. That was probably why she looked very tired, and asked where Delia's family was. The woman replied that she had no family and that she was homeless. When Marcel asked if she had a place to sleep in the coming days, Delia replied that she would find out by tomorrow evening. Marcel looked at his guest with compassion and asked if she liked the tea. Delia praised the tea and said that it warmed both her body and soul. Marcel offered Delia another cup. The girl replied that she had had enough and refused. Marcel insisted. Delia refused. She really had enough. Suddenly, the girl saw a woman's hand in a silk glove slip out from behind a curtain near one of the walls of the room. Delia was scared. Marcel noticed that the girl was nervous and asked what happened. The girl answered that she simply choked on her tea. Marcel was worried that Delia had a cold and was already developing a cough. Delia didn't hear his words. She was panicking. Why did she go to a stranger's house, not even knowing what he did? The girl's gaze fell on the huge scissors. And what if this was a deadly weapon for committing a crime? Delia thought. Marcel asked why her hands were shaking so much. The girl replied that she suddenly felt very cold. Marcel thoughtfully invited Delia to sit closer to the fireplace, to warm up and get rid of her cold. Marcel's soft and kind voice suddenly seemed ingratiating and sinister to Delia. The girl frantically looked for a reason not to get up from her chair and asked for more tea. Marcel realized that Delia was probably hungry too and asked her to wait a couple of minutes. The guy remembered that the girl said that she had nowhere to go and offered to spend the night at his place. Marcel said that the rooms on the second floor were vacant because it was inconvenient to use as a storage room. The young man was preparing a simple dinner for Delia and telling her something else about his home until he heard a crash behind him and turned around. Delia decided to sneak away while her strange master was busy, but she slipped and fell with a crash. Marcel looked at the girl's somersault in bewilderment. Everything happened so quickly, he didn't have time to help her in any way. Delia slipped and fell hard onto the floor, spreading her Wookiees like wings and hitting her head. Marcel leaned over to his guest and saw that she was lying unconscious. The awakening was strange and unexpected. Directly above her, Delia saw a chandelier of extraordinary beauty. The girl quickly stood up. She was lying on a small but very cozy sofa. Around her, incredibly elegant hats were displayed on the shelves. The dress hanging on a mannequin, standing by the window, struck the girl's imagination with its elegance. In the midst of all this splendor stood Marcel, welcoming Delia's awakening. The girl asked what happened and how she ended up in this unusual place. Marcel realized that Delia hadn't listened to him at all yesterday and had made up all sorts of horror stories for herself. The young man smiled kindly and told Delia that she was in the boutique in Marseille. Delia turned her head excitedly and informed the confused boy that she thought he was a cold-blooded scissor killer. There were simply scissors and women's gloved hands scattered all over the room, which is what made Delia come up with the scary story. Marcel explained that he had just moved into a new house yesterday and had not had time to completely unpack his things and dresses so that they would not gather dust. He covered them with curtains. The guy showed Delia one of his gloved hands. It was part of a mannequin, and the scissors were just tailor's scissors. That's why they were big. Delia apologized to Marcel for the inconvenience caused and the negative opinion she had of him. "If this is Marcel's boutique, and you are Marcel, then you are its owner," Delia finally guessed. The young man replied that he was indeed a fashion designer and that this house was his studio. Marcel boasted that he creates the designs himself and then sews the finished outfits. The young man created since childhood and enthusiastically showed his work to Delia. Marcel asked the girl which dress she liked the most. Delia replied, confused, that it was difficult for her to choose a favorite. All the dresses were very beautiful. Marcel replied that this was how it should be. Clothes without trying on are nothing. You can't choose the best dress without trying on everything. However, the designer had a very simple solution to this problem. Delia just needed to try on all the dresses, and then she could take everything she liked for herself. The indignant girl replied that this could not be done, and that she did not like it at all. Delia always believed that such expensive things could not be obtained for free. Marcel replied that he had no intention of giving Delia all her things for free. Delia once again decided that Marcel was a maniac and offered beautiful dresses to little girls to lure them. Marcel was surprised why Delia constantly suspected him of some unthinkable things. He just needed the girl's help, something that only she could do. Delia couldn't understand what kind of favor Marcel wanted in exchange for these fancy clothes. The brave knight was covered in sweat from fear in the presence of his duke. He could not understand why his master needed this girl who looked like a chicken. The duke was indignant. Why should he repeat his order twice? Sullivan was angry. Since when did his subordinates need a reason to fulfill his wishes? The frightened knight fell to his knees in a fit of fierce veneration for his master. At this time, the duke's secretary appeared at the door and reminded him that it was time for the owner to go to class. Sullivan reminded the knight that he had been ordered to deliver a golden-haired, curly-haired girl to the duke's residence. The main characteristic of this person was her incredible eloquence, although she herself was from a lower class. The duke demanded that she be found immediately and brought to him. The knight did not dare to contradict the duke. As soon as the door closed behind him, the man hurried to carry out Sullivan's order. The four knights listened attentively to their commander. The general described his conversation with the duke in vivid detail, accurately conveying the host's emotions. The subordinates were surprised at how accurately the commander imitated the duke's facial expressions. The general ended his story with an order for all his subordinates to immediately join the search for the girl with yellow hair. The subordinates objected that today was the day of collecting the feudal tax, and they certainly would not have time to look for all sorts of girls, and the general would not have time to do this at all. The general became sad. He couldn't handle the duke's task alone, so they suggested that he put the girl on the wanted list. The general asked how they would look for her. There were many girls of the same age on the territory of the duchy. The same soldier suggested simplifying the task and attaching a portrait of the girl to the text of the wanted poster. All the knights looked with respect at the knight who offered such a simple way out. The general immediately began to look for which of his subordinates could draw. One of the knights, named Miller, replied that his distant relative was an artist, and he also knew how to draw a little. The general, in high spirits, cheerfully ordered his soldiers to bring paper and paints, and others to gather all the guys who had been patrolling on the day of Delia's appearance at the palace. The general really wanted to catch this girl as quickly as possible and present her to the Duke as a gift. Extraordinarily beautiful legs in beautiful shoes walked along the pavement. The beauty's outfit attracted the attention of all the ladies walking with her down the street. Delia couldn't understand Marcel, what only she could do for him. Marcel explained that he wanted Delia to choose the most beautiful and well-fitting dress and walk down the street. The young man had no doubt that Delia's appearance would attract the attention of passers-by, and when they asked her where she bought such a dress, the girl would point to his boutique. According to Marcel, all that was left for the girl to do was choose the dress she liked. The young man believed that he should show everyone around him his most beautiful and charming image in his best dress. Delia wondered why she had to be the one doing this. Marcel launched into a long and lengthy discourse on fashion and the place of each person in it. Delia couldn't resist and ended up wearing a gorgeous dress from Marcel's collection. The young man finished her off by starting to cry, calling himself untalented and his dresses ugly. Delia was forced to prove Marcel wrong. Delia looked at her reflection and was frightened by it. The young blonde girl was not at all like the dyed elderly brunette she had been before. Two girls they met asked Delia where she bought such a luxurious dress. Delia looked around and prepared to answer them with the address of Marcel's boutique as planned, when she suddenly remembered the pendant. The puzzled looks of the girls who had not received an answer followed the very beautiful and very strange girl. Delia suddenly remembered her wooden pendant and rushed to look for it with all her might. The tent was still standing at the gates of the Duke's residence. The girl boldly entered it. Inside, everything remained the same as it had been. Delia carefully searched the entire space of the scarf, but she still could not find the pendant. Upset, she wandered down the street, arguing that even if the world she had found herself in was the real past, the place she was in was still her daughter's invention. Delia's gaze fell on one of the many shop windows, and she froze in shock. A statue of David by sculptor Michelangelo looked straight at her from the display case. Shocked, Delia moved as close to the sculpture as she could, trying to get a closer look at it. The girl touched the sculpture and pinched her cheek, checking whether she was still asleep. The owner of the shop appeared before Delia and asked if she was interested in antiques. The owner of the shop invited her to come inside and admire even more antique goods. Delia walked through and began to look with curiosity at both the ancient Greek ceramics and the Roman-style dishes, all of which had been brought from Gloria. The girl noted that there were many real relics and works here, and items from the East were mixed in with Western exhibits. Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa sold for a ridiculously low price. Delia told the shop owner that it was not a good idea to store the paintings like that, as the sun's rays would make them fade. The owner replied that these works were not so valuable that they needed to be kept too carefully, since they were written by unknown authors. After these words, the girl was overcome with moral shock, and she pointed to the portrait of Mona Lisa. Delia drew the shop owner's attention to the girl's face in the portrait, and the fact that it was impossible to tell whether she was smiling or not. The girl claimed that this was a very delicate job, and technically it was impossible to confess to her at all. Delia was surprised that such works of art did not have high value in this country, which earned her the respect of the shop owner. The man confirmed that he only has very high-end items here, but most of the authors are anonymous. Aristocrats today prefer famous authors, and therefore do not collect such paintings. The owner added that such paintings and sculptures have no value for investment. Delia decided that the aristocrats of this world were fools and hurried out of the shop. While pondering the fate of this and the previous worlds, Delia almost came face to face with Duke Sullivan. The girl heard how the shop owner spoke to his lordship in an unusually kind and even obsequious manner. The man wondered what brought his lordship to his modest shop. Sullivan replied that he wanted to ask the shop owner about one thing. Delia hid so as not to be noticed, but at the same time listened carefully to the men's conversation. The Duke handed the shop owner a wooden pendant and asked him if he had ever seen anything like it. The shop owner shrugged his shoulders in bewilderment. He had never seen such a mysterious thing. Delia looked closely at the Duke's hand. Sullivan held in his hand the very pendant that the girl needed so badly. The Duke asked the shop owner if he had ever seen a pattern like the one on this pendant. The man replied that it was the first time he had seen such a drawing, and asked where Sullivan got such a thing. The Duke explained that the pendant had been dropped by a beggar girl, and he needed to find it. Delia fell silent and listened to the conversation between the Duke and the shopkeeper. Sullivan thought he saw something familiar in the girl standing next to him, and he fell silent for a moment. The shopkeeper said that he had never seen an ornament like the one on the pendant before, and that the design seemed unusual to him. Usually, such pendants are made to attract good luck, and the sun placed in the middle serves to attract happiness. Delia listened carefully and realized that the unusual thing about the design of her pendant was that it had an image of the moon around the edge. The girl was alarmed by the Duke's message that he was looking for her, but she was sure that the Duke did not remember her. Last time, he didn't recognize Delia until a subordinate told him. Delia came up with the idea of posing as a noble person, the owner of the pendant, as if she had initially lost it, and the beggar was supposed to find and return it. Or maybe she should just grab the pendant and run away, relying on the strength of her legs. But then Delia remembered how her daughter had told her about the full moon, and realized that until that time, she would not need the pendant. The shopkeeper reasoned that since time immemorial, the sun had been considered a symbol of good luck. The moon design on the pendant puzzled him. Delia didn't even listen to him anymore. She decided not to take any risks for now, and wait until the pendant was returned. The girl realized that these people still didn't know what she served for. The Duke was disappointed. He was convinced that the shopkeeper was seeing such a thing for the first time. The man confirmed Sullivan's guess. He had never seen such an ornament before. From the men's conversation, Delia realized that there was no visible drawing on the back of the pendant, and she would only find out what was there on the day of the full moon. That is, in a month. The shopkeeper suggested that the pendant was most likely made of oak wood and probably quite recent. The shopkeeper returned the pendant to the Duke, and he could say nothing more about it. The man advised Sullivan to get rid of the thing, as he felt it would bring him bad luck. The shopkeeper reminded the Duke that several people had died during the previous polar night, and he simply became furious whenever he saw the moon. Delia didn't listen to the rest of the conversation. She ran as fast as she could to Marcel's boutique. She needed to urgently implement her plan. Right from the doorway, Delia asked Marcel if he knew Duke Sullivan. Marcel replied that he had not heard of such a thing, and asked how Delia knew about it. Delia did not deign to give Marcel a clear answer, and clarified whether the higher title was Baron or Duke. Marcel replied that the Baron was higher than the Duke. Delia asked if there were any clergy in the country. The girl was very surprised to hear that there were no such people in the country, just as there were no believers. Marcel replied that the population is divided into three main classes: the aristocracy, which includes the king, baron, marquis, count, viscount, duke, and knights. The second class is the common people, free and serfs. The third is the lowest, slaves and vagabonds. Delia asked Marcel what status he belonged to, and he replied that he was higher than the Duke and belonged to the aristocracy. Marcel stated that Delia belonged to the lower class. The girl was surprised how he could have known about this. Marcel replied that from the clothes she was wearing, only slaves and vagabonds wore such rags, so anyone who saw Delia in those clothes could easily guess that she belonged to the lower class. Delia was surprised that, knowing about her origin, Marcel dressed her in such a beautiful and expensive dress and let her go out into the street alone. Marcel replied that he was not at all afraid that she would deceive him. The man told the girl that this country is called Imperium, and only force reigns there. In the Imperium, those with power are not only perceived by status and origin. For each person, the definition of strength differs depending on their value system. For some, strength is power. For others, it is combat power. For others, it is intelligence. Those with power are treated as equals by the people of the Imperium, regardless of status. For Marcel, the highest power lies in beauty, so he accepts Delia as his equal. Delia reasoned that status was still more important than power, when in other cases she received treatment that befitted her lowly position. The girl thought hard about what Marcel had told her. Delia suddenly asked if Marcel had any acquaintances among the aristocracy who could tell her about the influence, disputes, and disagreements of the nobility in the Imperium. Marcel stated that in order to create sparkling outfits, he needed to preserve his pure inner world, which was not facilitated by soul-blackening communication with high society. Delia asked if every inhabitant of the empire could afford to buy a dress from Marcel. He replied that his products were expensive, and some cost as much as an entire house. Hearing this, the girl asked Marcel to ask the girls who came to him with orders if they had a job suitable for her. Marcel sighed in disappointment. Did Delia really want to leave him? The man looked sadly into the girl's charming eyes. Marcel was upset to tears. Did Delia really not like working for him and wearing the clothes he created? Delia reassured her friend that she simply wanted to get closer to the noble ladies, so that she could show them his outfits and he would increase sales. Marcel noted that aristocrats could come to his boutique themselves, which is why Delia was suffering. The girl was pleased with Marcel's care, but she needed to get into aristocratic circles. Delia brought down on Marcel a mass of arguments, according to which it turned out that placing her in some noble house to serve would be beneficial to both of them. Marcel could not bear the pressure and agreed. He was not able to hold the girl by force. Pleased by her friend's compliance, Delia also asked him to teach her to read and write. The general looked with admiration at Loomer's portrait of Delia. Now the girl would be found quickly. Marcel was styling Delia's hair, preparing to send her on another publicity walk. The tailor was delighted with his pupil. She learned the letters in one night. It was the first time Delia had seen such writing, but the principle was the same as in reality. But Marcel only had one book. Delia went outside, thought for a moment, and then ran to the antique shop. In her haste, she did not notice Bellucci, who unexpectedly appeared at the door of the boutique. Bellucci didn't have time to say anything to Delia, as she ran off in a direction known only to her, paying no attention to anyone. To tell the truth, Bellucci herself was surprised to see her friend in an expensive new dress. She barely recognized her. The girl noticed that Delia came out of the doors, through the glass of which expensive outfits were visible. For some time, Bellucci looked at the chic dresses and hats through the glass door. Emboldened, the girl entered the boutique. At first, Marcel mistook her for a client, but when he saw her beggarly dress, he became confused. Bellucci dispelled his doubts by telling him that she was Delia's friend and saw her come out of that door. Marcel asked Bellucci to wait for Delia and offered her some tea. Bellucci was about to refuse, but the conversation was interrupted by loud screams from excited women of different ages. A crowd of clients of all ages burst through the boutique door, eager to order an outfit from Marcel. The ladies wanted to see the designer and the tailor, which left not only Bellucci, but also Marcel himself, completely confused. Marcel tried to calm the heated ladies down, but he had little success. The crowd almost crushed the couturier. The ladies competed over styles and fabrics. The visit of so many clients at the same time threatened to turn into a brawl. Marcel begged for help, and Bellucci agreed to save him. The couturier asked her to take paper order forms and write down the names of everyone who came. The girl was confused and told the master that she couldn't write. Marcel was upset at first. How else could this friend of Delia's help him? Bellucci herself didn't know what to do next. Enterprising Marcel came up with another solution. He decided to take all the ladies out of the boutique, and the girl would let them in order of queue. Bellucci was delighted. She would cope with this task perfectly. In an antique store, Delia found real-life works of art and artifacts. The girl reasoned that this was, of course, an imaginary world, and that the Duke had been confused with the Baron. However, it would be strange to transfer real things into a novel without changes. Delia looked through several books, but she always came across a recipe for cooking falconer's food. Delia was distracted from her futile search by the question of the origin of her outfit. The girl clearly answered that she had purchased this dress to order in the Marcel boutique, which is located in a green building on the 3rd Street. The ladies left, and Delia returned to her search. It was already beginning to seem to her that she would not be able to highlight any information from the books. Delia was about to leave when a brilliant idea suddenly came to her mind. The girl asked the merchant if he had maps of the Imperium and other countries. To the shopkeeper's bewilderment, Delia replied that her father was sending her on a trip, and she had absolutely no idea where to go. Maybe he could advise her on something. The shopkeeper unfolded the map and explained that to the north and south of the developed lands, there was a snowy land and a desert. Respectively, these places were not suitable for the travel of little ladies. The girl noticed that the map said Finis, which was probably the name of the entire world. The map was quite simple, but it showed the borders of states and land holdings. Delia asked if it was true that many people from Gloria were moving to the Imperium, and she was told that in Gloria the most important thing is honor, and if people lose it, they run away to another country. The merchant recommended that the girl go to Meridium, the capital of Pecunia. It was more interesting there than in Gloria. Delia realized that from Latin pecunia is translated as wealth, and meritum is benefit. The merchant said that all the goods from the mainland were collected in the port of Meridium, and that there were high-class hotels along the coast. The girl asked about Libertas, and learned that all the people there were vagabonds. There was no government, and there was no security. Libertas is freedom, and Gloria is glory, Delia realized. So the names of the countries here define their values. The girl pointed her finger at an incomprehensible triangle on the map. There was no inscription on it. The man explained that this was Trigon, a military neutral zone of 3 countries, where outsiders were not allowed to enter, and it was impossible to get in. Delia guessed that the dotted line divided the land holdings of the aristocrats. The girl pointed to the most convenient location, and decided that the capital would certainly be there. She was told that the place was the estate of Duke Sullivan. Delia stated that then Sullivan must be the most influential in the Imperium. The merchant replied that the most influential was Baron Moulton, despite the fact that the capital was within the Duchy of Sullivan. The man showed her where the barony was. It was large, but the border was not guarded and was more like a wasteland. But Sullivan's holdings were around the capital. This state of affairs seemed very strange to Delia. The girl always believed that quality was more important than quantity, and since the best lands and the capital belonged to Sullivan, he should be the baron. The shopkeeper was frightened by the girl's words and asked her not to speak about it loudly. Delia was frightened not by her own carelessness, but by the shopkeeper, who looked around and made sure that they were alone in the room. The man leaned close to the girl's ear and whispered that, in his opinion, Sullivan looked more like a baron. Delia listened attentively to everything her interlocutor said. The shopkeeper said that Duke Sullivan was elegant and fearsome, but his appearance did not suggest that he was the least of the country's aristocrats. You can't say the same about Baron Moulton. It's clear from everything that he's a very superficial person. His family isn't very ancient, and they say that he's an illegitimate child. The shopkeeper believed that these conversations were not in vain. Besides, there was a rumor that the baron had risen to his status by dishonest means. Delia was puzzled by the opinion that Moulton was not fit to be a baron, and this was the opinion of many in the country. The obliging shopkeeper offered the lady a look at the lands of her house and asked her the name of her family. The girl pretended that she had stayed too long and that curfew was approaching. She thanked the kind clerk and hurried away. On the way back, Delia talked about the strangeness of this country. The youngest aristocrat grabbed the best lands for himself, and Gloria is a very strange place. The girl remembered the pots from Gloria that she had seen in an antique shop, very similar to ancient Greek ceramics. Admiring the clouds, Delia reasoned that the motifs could be borrowed, but other countries did not remind her of real ones. So where did all the goods in the antique shop come from? On the way, the girl found herself in a crowd of people discussing some poster on the wall. The girl pushed forward, and her surprise reached its limit. On the wall hung a caricature very similar to her, with a description and a promise for information of a paltry reward of 1 aurum. Sullivan's guards were looking for her. People began to disperse, laughing skeptically. They considered it impossible to find a person with such a description and image, and for such a ridiculous price. The captain supervised the posting of posters. Everyone was very tired of this business, and the night executor convinced the commander to drop everything and go and relax in the nearest bar. Suddenly, the captain jumped up and hurried towards the departing girl. The man grabbed the girl's hand tightly and had no intention of letting go. At last he found her. Such an experienced man could not be deceived by rich clothes. Delia was confused. It was useless to resist. Something would happen now. The captain held Delia tightly by the elbow. There was no chance of breaking free or running away. The knight called the girl a little yellow chicken and said that his grace was waiting for her. But where did the commoner get such a chic dress? The captain was puzzled. Delia remembered what Marcel had said about how, in the Imperium, power depended on importance. Since he was a knight of the Sullivan Duchy, he was loyal to his master, and the only thing that could scare him was pressure and impudence. The captain called the other knights to him and reported that he had caught the missing person. Without turning around, Delia angrily declared that the captain was an impudent scoundrel. The confident tone made the captain stop and let go of the girl. Inspired by her success, Delia increased her pressure, turned around, and screamed at the knight, accusing him of calling her a commoner. The captain was sure he was right, but Delia insisted. She asked what family of knights he belonged to. Confused, the man replied that he served Duke Sullivan. Delia was outraged that even such respected houses dared to engage in lawlessness now. Had the prestige of her Zekis Hecalius family really fallen so low? The name of such a family was naturally unfamiliar to the knights, which made the guys even more confused. The confusion of the boys gave Delia strength, and she angrily declared how dare he, a pathetic knight, be rude to her, a high-born aristocrat. The captain mumbled that he had never heard of her family before. Delia said that, as if he hadn't insulted the young lady, he now dared to claim that he had never heard the name of her family. Since the captain is a knight of the Sullivan Duchy, Delia said that she would tell her father to send people there immediately. The knights were seriously frightened, fell to their knees before Delia, and began to ask forgiveness for their rudeness. Delia firmly forbade the knights to raise their heads in her presence. The captain bowed even lower and apologized profusely. Delia said she had heard of the Sullivans as a decent people who cared about their residents. However, the level of behavior of Duke Sullivan's knights suggests that this information is false. Those who serve the master, Delia said, must act in such a way as not to disgrace his honor. By attacking a defenseless child of high rank, Duke Sullivan's knights have dishonored their master. Moreover, Delia said, they had insulted her family and her parents and her roots, an insult they could only wash away with blood, and she wanted to cut off their heads. Pretending to be softened by the knight's submission, Delia magnanimously declared that she would forgive them this time. The boys were glad that there would be no punishment for their mistake. However, Delia made a condition that the knights show due respect to her family here and now. The knights were ready to fulfill any of her demands. Delia demanded that they remain in this position, for the sake of her family and the Sullivan family, whom they had dishonored. This would prove their sincerity. The boys were not supposed to raise their heads and stand up until the mistress allowed them to do so. While the kneeling knights argued about who was to blame for the situation, Delia tiptoed away from them and then ran at full speed. While running away, Delia thought that Sullivan had apparently sent knights to look for her. But why would he need her? Maybe because of the pendant. Not far from Marcel's boutique, Delia bumped into Bellucci. The friend looked charming in her new dress and explained that it was a gift from Marcel for helping with clients. Delia was happy for her friend. The dress suited her incredibly, although Bellucci was embarrassed, since she wore such an outfit for the first time. Delia invited Bellucci to have lunch together, but the girl refused. She was already late and needed to run home. Bellucci suggested spending time together next time and promised to visit Delia. At the doors of the boutique, Marcel said goodbye to the noblewoman, and she promised to send a carriage. This dialogue seemed strange to Delia. Marcel saw the girl and said that he had found a job for her. It turned out that Baron Milton was looking for a servant. Delia was surprised. Life was full of coincidences and signs. Marcel reported that the Miltons needed a rather unusual maid. The Baron needed a companion servant for his only daughter. Origin was not important. The main thing was the right age, accommodation, and food at the employer's expense, plus a salary of 500 ferrums. Marcel added that they would soon send a carriage, and if Delia wanted, she could go. Bellucci met her mother. The woman was reclining on the couch with a smoking pipe and looking at her daughter with irritation. The girl enthusiastically showed off her new dress and said that it was a gift from her friend. The woman did not believe her daughter and did not even listen to her story about how she earned this dress. Looking coldly at her daughter, the beauty called her a liar and started a scolding and scandal. Bellucci listened in silence. Everything was as usual, but today it was somehow more offensive than always. Delia got ready quickly and now was pining away while waiting for the carriage, wondering if maybe the carriage was being built for her from scratch, and that was why she was taking so long. Marcel asked if she was really going to leave. He had a bunch of cool dresses made for her. Just an incredible number. Delia reassured her friend that she would wear his dresses and live in comfort, and it would all be thanks to him. Marcel was sorry to let the girl go, and he asked her to visit him more often. At this moment, the door to the boutique swung open, and a tearful Bellucci appeared on the threshold, hugging a new dress. Delia rushed to her friend, asking who had offended her and what had happened. Bellucci just cried. She noticed the packed suitcase and asked where Delia was going. The girl replied that Marcel had found a vacancy for her as a servant in a noble family, and that a carriage would soon arrive to pick her up. Bellucci rushed to her friend with a plea to take her with her, promising to do everything Delia asked. Delia suggested that Bellucci stay with Marcel and work in her place in the boutique. The girl replied that this was not a solution. Her mother would soon find her and drag her home. Marcel said that Bellucci needed time to pack his things, and the carriage would arrive soon. Bellucci replied that she had no things at all. No clothes, no shoes, only what she was wearing. At this time, a man entered the boutique and said that he had come from Baron Milton to pick up the maid. Marcel advised Delia to go, and he would think of something with Bellucci. The girl walked briskly towards the door. Her beloved and only friend sat on the floor, incredibly upset and sure that Delia would leave without her. Delia turned around and asked why Bellucci wasn't following her. The girl was delighted and hurried to the carriage. The coachman asked which of the two girls was going to the barony. Delia replied that they were going together. The coachman was indignant. He had received orders to bring only one maid. Delia ordered Bellucci to get into the carriage and told the coachman that he had not listened well to his master's orders. Without listening to any objections from the coachman, Delia quickly got into the carriage. The girl looked at the man and said that if he was not going to return for the second maid again, then he should take them both. The coachman didn't understand anything, but he was confused by the confidence with which the blonde gave orders. Sitting in the carriage, Delia remembered Marcel's words that this was the Imperium, a country where power reigned, and she thought that maybe Baron Milton would recognize power in her. Bellucci, sitting next to Delia, was glad that she had managed to get away from the evil woman that fate had destined to be her mother. The coachman didn't understand anything. He was used to obeying the strong, and now his thoughts were in complete disarray. Bellucci looked at the landscape outside the window with pleasure. She noticed a brown ribbon on a branch of one of the trees. The girl looked at the ribbon for a long time, not understanding who could have called her so high. The housekeeper, like the coachman, clearly remembered that she had been ordered to hire only one servant and did not understand why two girls had arrived. She ordered the coachman to stop, but Delia offered to hire two. The housekeeper replied that the girl was talking nonsense, and one of them had to come back. Delia said that she personally could not return because she had bragged to all her friends that she had been hired by the baron. And in general, the girl wondered if the daughter of such a high-born gentleman as a baron would really be satisfied with just one servant. The last argument seemed reasonable to the housekeeper, especially since she now had someone to choose from. Two candidates are always better than one. The woman took the girls to the servants' room and ordered them to be in the kitchen at 5 in the morning without delay, and after that they were to meet with the mistress. The housekeeper left. The friends, not believing that they had succeeded, closed the door and were left alone. Delia fell onto the bed, exhausted. It had been a hard day. She had had to demonstrate her strength too often today. Bellucci admired the maid's form, and she found the material from which the dress was made and the frills that decorated it beautiful. The girl thought that wearing such clothes and working in them was simply wonderful and was very grateful to Delia for taking her with her. In the morning, the girls set to work. Bellucci willingly and quickly carried out all orders. Delia, on the contrary, thought that they were being overloaded. The girls were sent to serve refreshments in the living room. They had to enter silently, follow all instructions, but not leave until told. Bellucci was very interested in what the baron's daughter was like. Delia did not quite understand her friend's delight. The girls entered the living room and saw the baron. He was receiving a guest and talking to her about preparing for his daughter's wedding. The guest believed that the baroness was still so young, and there was no need to rush to marry her off. Delia looked at the man and decided that this was Baron Milton. His guest was probably of lower status than he, and was not on close terms with the baron. Of course, the baron's daughter was sitting at the table, a beautiful girl, but with a very stern expression on her face. Delia decided that the baroness was a complex and interesting character. However, what struck the former professor of history and archaeology most was the portrait hanging on the living room wall. It was Girl with a Pearl Earring by the Dutch artist Jan Vermeer, the Northern Mona Lisa, apparently the original. Delia was filled with respect for the baron. Only a true connoisseur and art lover could acquire such a painting. The guest asked to show her a ceramic vase recently acquired by the Baron. The Baron drew the guest's attention to the sought-after vase and told him that it had been bought at an auction in Pecunia. He admired its magnificent shapes and patterns. Delia, along with the owners, looked closely at the vase and was amazed by the delicacy of the work. The pattern on the vase resembled blossoming bunches of grapes. The Baron said that he had many unique ceramic dishes in his collection, but this vase, due to the high level of painting, was his most valuable acquisition. Delia couldn't understand who created this wonderful vase, but she agreed with the owner that it was unique. The Baron boasted that this vase was a true national treasure. Delia agreed with him completely. The guest assumed that this vase was very expensive. The Baron replied that no amount of money would be wasted on such works of art. True dignity, the Baron believed, comes only from a respectful attitude towards art. The Baron's daughter was clearly bored and burdened by the conversation. She ordered the maids to bring her some fruit. Delia thoughtfully analyzed the Baron's words, and Bellucci immediately ran to carry out the young lady's order. The guest suggested that the Baron probably planned to give this vase to his daughter for her wedding. The Baron agreed that it would be a wonderful gift for the most beautiful bride, the most beautiful thing. Bellucci walked carefully towards the table with fruit. She carefully passed by the vase in question. The owner's daughter, unexpectedly and unnoticed by others, stuck out her foot so that the girl stumbled. Quite predictably, Bellucci lost her balance. The Baroness planned everything correctly. The girl fell, catching her foot on a table with a vase. Delia froze in surprise and fear. Bellucci lay on the floor, with fragments of the most unique and expensive vase in the world scattered around her. The Baron froze in surprise and lost the power of speech. Bellucci turned white with fear and despair. The young Baroness was delighted with her malicious trick. Delia rushed to her friend, examined her, and asked if everything was okay. Bellucci was safe, but now she was afraid of the consequences. The young Baroness screamed at the girl, called her scum, and said that she couldn't even apologize. Bellucci threw herself at her mistress's feet, asking her to forgive her. The girl promised to pay for the damage with her hard work. The young Baroness was adamant. She was not going to forgive the maid. She had to be kicked out. Otherwise, she might reveal her role in what happened. The Baron screamed that it was all a terrible dream, and his daughter was already asking him what to do. The girl inflamed her father's anger by reminding him that this pottery had cost him 500 gold coins. Bellucci was shocked by the exorbitant cost of the vase. Delia, hearing such a sum, looked closely at the fragments. The Baron declared that even if she worked until the end of her days, the maid would never pay such a sum, and despite this, she continued to chatter. Bellucci cried and promised to work for the Baron until she died. The only thing she asked was not to be kicked out. Delia was attracted by a golden glint on the floor. It was a fork. The girl raised the cutlery above her head and examined it. She brought it down with force and anger on one of the fragments of the ill-fated vase. The consequences made her think and take a closer look at the vase fragments. The Baron, incredibly upset, called the butler and wanted to order him to throw the culprit of the incident out. Delia stopped him with a loud shout. The girl asked how much he paid for it, and in fact he bought this ceramic. "Didn't she hear?" The Baron replied. 500 gold, not counting the cost of transportation and the broker. Delia said that the pottery looked good from a distance, but up close, it didn't seem expensive at all. The Baron hardly listened to the strange girl. "Your vase," said Delia, "is a worthless trinket." The Baron did not expect such a statement. Delia continued to explain that the value of this pottery lies in its high quality, elegant shape, and designs. But the piece is broken, and it is impossible to verify the shape parameters. The girl suggested looking at the bottom of the vase to find out its age. Judging by the appearance of the bottom, this is a fairly old piece, but not ancient. Delia suggested looking at 2 different pieces of the vase. The glaze on them was of different thicknesses. One of the fragments was covered with a thicker layer of glaze. This, in Delia's opinion, was bad, and meant that the master who made this piece deviated from the technology and distributed the glaze unevenly. The Baron and his guest listened attentively as Delia said that no matter how old the piece was, its color should not have changed. This same pottery had a faded shine and a dull color. Everyone agreed. The Baron looked at his acquisition with new eyes. Delia explained that even though the ceramics were old, that didn't mean they were of good quality. The young Baroness sensed something was wrong, and declared that Delia was simply shielding her friend. Delia said that it would be too big a lie, and she would not be able to save her friend that way. The girl handed the Baron the shard and asked him to look closely at the patterns and say what color they were. The Baron replied that he had always thought the patterns were black, but if you looked closely, they were blue. The guest noted that if it was white porcelain with bluish pigments, then it was not a cheap thing. Porcelain made from cobalt with bluish pigments is the highest class and costs even more. Delia replied that if you handle ordinary materials correctly, you can create things that at first glance are even more valuable than those made from rare materials. If there is something wrong with the white porcelain, the pattern may be distorted when it is coated. If you try to save the drawing, the color will be unsaturated. The temperature at which porcelain is baked and the temperature at which it is colored with wire pigment are different. Delia agreed with the lady that porcelain with blue pigmentation was very valuable, but when this vase was made, such pigmentation was not used. The original pieces are covered with a grape pattern painted with wire pigment and have an elegant shape, which is why they are valued. The Baron clarified. The girl said that this is the same antique item. Then its value is appropriate. Delia did not dispute the fact that the value of white porcelain was great, but a broken vase was an exception. Delia suggested that the Baron check her statement himself. The girl recommended dipping this piece in boiling water, which guarantees that the pattern on the shard will be erased. What we have in front of us is simply a fake, Delia concluded. A similar design was simply applied to an old vase. The Baron asked the strange servant whether she really thought that this ceramic was fake. Delia reiterated her opinion. The Baroness ordered that boiling water be brought immediately, but the Baron stopped his daughter. He looked angrily at Delia and asked who she was and why he hadn't seen her before. The girl replied that she had only been hired yesterday. The Baron asked what Delia's status was. The girl replied that she was not an aristocrat. The man swung and hit Delia so hard that she fell to the floor. Bellucci's eyes widened in fear for her dear friend. The guest looked disapprovingly at the Baron, but remained silent. The Baron shouted that the rabble had completely lost all fear. The scoundrel dares to insult his sharp eye. The Baron was indignant. Delia replied that how then could a Baron with such a prominent eye have acquired such real trash? The guest stopped the Baron's anger with a light gesture of her elegant hand. The woman said that a high-born Baron should not get involved with such scum. This vase is now just a worthless piece of clay. It doesn't matter anymore whether it was real or not. Delia looked at the lady carefully. She was not as simple as she seemed. The guest took one of the fragments of the vase and said that perhaps one of her friends could establish the authenticity of the item. And what could such a little girl know? She heard something somewhere by accident, but made it up a bit, and that's how she got out of it. The woman considered 500 gold pieces to be a considerable sum of money, even for a rich man like Baron Milton. The Baron looked at his guest and coughed, not understanding whether she really thought he was rich or was being ironic. The guest reminded that the Baron wanted to give her something, which was the reason for the invitation. The Baron and the guest retired to another room, but before leaving, the Baron ordered the yellow-haired girl to be thrown out. Delia realized that for Baron Milton, even a moment's disregard for status was much more important than learning the truth. Looking at the back of the retreating Baron, Delia was glad that everything turned out exactly this way. Delia headed for the door and called Bellucci with her, holding out her hand. Delia's friend turned away from her, and she made a different decision. Bellucci said she would stay in the Baron's house. Delia was taken aback. She was surprised by her decision. The girl tried to convince her friend, trying to draw attention to the owner's behavior. Bellucci explained that for working here, she would be given food and clothes, and would not be beaten for not earning money. The butler hurried Delia, forcing her to get ready and leave the house as quickly as possible. The man grabbed Delia by the collar of her dress and dragged her towards the exit. The girl tried to shout to her friend, but in vain. Delia walked briskly along the road to the city and thought about how people like the Baron were influential in the Imperium. It was a laughing matter. The girl was not let go of the fear for her friend. Soon Delia was caught up by a carriage following the same road as hers, from the Baron's castle to the city. The carriage stopped, and the Baron's guest greeted Delia. The lady invited her to sit in the carriage with her. Delia did not resist. The lady brought Delia to her castle, located not far from the Baron's estate. Delia looked around, assessed the furnishings, and realized that this house was more luxurious than the Baron's. The woman brought the girl into a room with a vase similar to the one the Baron had. The lady asked Delia to determine the authenticity of this item. The perfection of the shapes and design unmistakably indicated the authenticity of the product, which Delia hastened to inform its owner about. The lady told the girl that she was wrong. This vase is a fake and was purchased on the black market in Pecunia, and less than 100 orums were paid for it. Delia replied that it meant the lady was lucky. The actual value of the item does not depend on where it was purchased. The passage of time, changes in fashion, they will always be valued because they are made with quality. The intrinsic value of an object does not diminish with time, and Delia was a person who believed in such value. Delia's mind believed that even if space and time were reversed, valuable things would still remain valuable. Delia began to list the signs of authenticity of the vase. The glaze was applied perfectly. The design was also excellent. The protruding neck gave it a natural shape. Delia claimed that the vase was real, and she had already proven it. The lady was surprised and replied that she had always considered this thing a fake. But here, too, Delia refuted her. The girl replied that the lady was making fun of her, and the Baron knew that his vase was fake, since he had placed it in the middle of the living room, in the passage, next to the chairs. Delia pointed out to the lady that her vase stood in the office against the wall on a wide and not too high table, away from the bookcase, and that was not how cheap things were stored. The lady even took off her gloves before entering the room so as not to accidentally drop the vase made of slippery gloves. In addition, there are thick curtains in the room so that direct sunlight does not spoil the color of the vase. The lady listened attentively to Delia and did not dispute anything. The girl repeated once again that fake ceramics are not taken care of in the same way. The lady laughed and said that the girl was absolutely right. This vase was real and was a family heirloom. Delia was glad to be completely right. The lady was surprised that a girl with such a deep level of knowledge was selling flowers. The woman said that on the day the girl brought her friends selling flowers to the Belvia restaurant, she was also there. The lady the girl pointed to was known for her frivolity and talkativeness. If she had made such a donation, she would have told everyone about it herself. Thus, in order to avoid suspicion, the girl hid the source of her money and at the same time increased the lady's rating. Then the lady thought that this golden-haired girl was a very unusual girl. Delia guessed that this was why the lady had helped her at the Baron's residence. The lady confirmed her guess. Delia was about to say goodbye to the lady and leave, but she stopped her. She asked the girl's name, and she replied, Delia. The lady said that Deli had a high intellect, and therefore she, Marie Chelsea, recognized her strength. Marie honestly admitted that she needed Delia's help. The girl was very surprised that they were speaking to her in a respectful manner, and that they even knelt before her. Marie calmly responded that it was just a sign of respect. When an aristocrat of the empire acknowledges the strength of an opponent, you must kneel down and kiss the back of his hand. Delia, not being stupid, suspected something was wrong, since Marcel had never done such a thing. The noble lady wanted to continue her triad, but it was interrupted by the girl. Delia interrupted the noble lady's monologue. She had a very important question. Delia became curious about what all the books in the lady's office were about. All the books in this office are in the recipe for Calbi ribs. She became well acquainted with the collection. Absolutely all the books were about the recipe for ribs. It turns out that Marie loves them so much that she doesn't read anything else. A slight smile touched the woman's lips. The girl, as always, was right. Marie reported that the books were indeed identical, both in appearance and in content. One book would be enough, but they contain memories. Now these books are absolutely of no interest to her. Duke Sullivan spoke of the memories contained in these books in exactly the same way as the girl. Delia was surprised that the woman knew the Duke. In fact, there is not a single person among the aristocrats of the Imperium who does not know Duke Sullivan. Delia once again remembered that Marcel knew the Duke. Was he really not an aristocrat? Marie suggested that the girl continue their conversation. There will soon be a banquet in honor of Baron Milton's birthday. The Baron has terrible taste, but he is even more vain. He likes to collect items that others do not have. On the day of the annual banquet, the invited guests must show the gift they have prepared to the defense and the appraiser. If Milton likes it, Tons will gladly accept the gift. Otherwise, something terrible will happen. Delia understood exactly what the Duchess was asking for. She needs Delia to choose a gift for the Baron's birthday. If she gives a good gift, her position will be strengthened. Delia agreed without any problem. which made the lady very happy. However, the girl set one condition. The girl and the Duchess arrived at an old antique shop. Marie used to visit this place often. The local security guard is acquainted with the Duchess, and Delia was introduced by her friend. Recently, the Duchess purchased a painting here, which made the owner very happy. The woman is still delighted with her purchase. While she was talking to the owner, Delia made her choice. The girl pointed to an unremarkable chest and demanded to know its price. The old chest was worth 800 iron coins, but on a special occasion, he would sell it for 500. Pretty dressed. She said that they were buying it and asked to get into the carriage with him. The owner happily began loading, and the majestic lady paid. The man happily carried the goods, which he considered to be unsaleable, into the Duchess's carriage. The girl asked where this thing was from, to which she received an uncertain answer that the chest was found in the desert. Upon returning to the estate, Delia began to lay out her conditions. The Duchess must take her with her to the banquet. The second condition will be that if the Baron does not like the gift, Marie will fulfill her request. And most importantly, a noble lady should not object or choose another gift. If all three of these conditions are met, Delia will decide everything. The Duchess had no questions about the first two, but she did not understand why she could not express her opinion about the third. The girl does not ignore the Duchess's opinion. She simply suggests following her vision so that everything will be fine. Although Marie trusts Delia, she cannot understand at all why she chose this particular thing. The Duchess doesn't understand what the little commoner is thinking about. At night, in the estate where Bellucci works, everyone was getting ready for bed. The girl was heading to her room after a hard day. However, she heard some whispers and strange sounds, and listened. The sounds came from the young lady's chambers, and the girl thought that something was wrong. She pressed her ear to the door and heard groans. The frightened maid burst into the room, throwing the doors wide open. It turned out that nothing terrible was happening. The young lady was simply on a date with an unknown young man. Bellucci immediately awkwardly covered her face. She had been very wrong in her judgment. For a moment she was speechless, staring at the couple. The girl was scared, but her partner apparently didn't care. The guy calmly looked at the maid and asked his beloved about the maid. The guy started flirting with the maid, which stunned his girlfriend. Bellucci still stood there without words or emotions. The guy moved away from the young lady, deciding to leave. Lady Eliza was outraged by this. Adam, her boyfriend, had just arrived and was already leaving. To her panicked question about when he would come again, he answered a little rudely, "Everything will depend on the lady herself. He will not appear without her permission." But tomorrow, he hoped to see her in blue. It was a signal for Adam to come prepared too. Bellucci began to apologize. She thought that the lady needed help, but Elisa demanded that she leave. At first, the maid did not understand what the mistress meant and why she was so angry. During the day, Delia showed up at Marcel's. The tailor didn't expect to see her. With some malice, the girl reported that she had been fired. However, she returned alone, although she had entered the job together with Bellucci. Bellucci said that she would remain as a maid, but the golden-haired one still worried about her friend. Marcel is just going to see this duke, so he wouldn't mind taking the girl with him. In fact, after the scandal, the former maid had better not show up there. Marcel agreed to check on Bellucci and tell the news to the girl. Delia turned to Marcel. She decided to ask him directly about her guesses. Marcel is not an aristocrat, no matter how much he would like to pretend to be one. The guy turned to the girl, looking at her in shock. It turns out he lied to Delia. He is not an aristocrat at all. When the young man was about to object, they were interrupted by an ambassador from Baron Milton. One of the Baron's servants reminded him that Marcel, as a tailor, must appear immediately at court. Delia demanded that he explain everything to her first, but the young man interrupted her. Whatever Marcel says, he never lies. He asks her not to doubt it. The girl frowned. She didn't quite trust Marcel in this regard, but the calm expression on the young man's face reassured her, and Marcel promised to return. All of his things were already packed, so he set off on his journey without any problems. The golden-haired girl followed her friend's gaze, remaining in place. Bellucci continued to serve the young lady Elisa. After an unsuccessful date, the girl was very angry. Eliza asked to bring perfume, and Bellucci brought oil. The maid is completely clueless. She doesn't know anything, why she was hired at all. Bellucci was upset and listened to all the unpleasant words of the lady. Finally, a middle-aged woman approached the girl and joyfully greeted the young lady. Lady Eliza was so busy with her new clothes that she didn't even hear her mother arrive. All the anger immediately evaporated from the girl. She happily ran to meet her mother. The girl immediately pounced on her mother, affectionately begging her for gifts. Today there will be a fitting of a dress for the banquet in honor of the Baron's birthday. While the woman was talking, she saw a new maid, and I addressed Bellucci directly, although her daughter was upset that the maid had attracted her mother's attention. Bellucci immediately began to greet the lady and bow to her. The Baroness found Bellucci to be a rather sweet and pleasant girl, which did not please Eliza at all. The little lady said that this sweet, in quotes, maid, had recently destroyed expensive ceramics. Bellucci became worried. The Baroness would most likely fire her from her job. But the Baroness thought something completely different. For the Baron's family, 500 gold coins was such a large sum. A middle-aged woman approached a young maid, not at all concerned about propriety. The maid introduced herself exactly as the Baroness had asked her to. The woman extended her hand to Bellucci. Just like when you did, Bella? The girl closed her eyes. Her mother usually beat her after that. But the good-natured woman surprised her very much. Her gentle hands simply lay on her shoulders. The woman asked not to be offended by her daughter. Despite the fact that Eliza seems strong, she suffers from loneliness. The woman asked the maid to take care of the young mistress, arrived in Marseille just in time, and invited the young gentleman to a fitting. Bellucci was immensely happy to see a familiar person. Marcel waved good-naturedly at her and got down to work. As soon as Eliza tried on her new dress, she beamed with happiness. The Baroness compared her daughter to a spring fairy, and the young lady will become the main heroine of the banquet. While the girl and her mother were discussing the banquet, Marcel began to question Bellucci about her life. However, he noticed that the girl was not in the mood for a direct conversation. Bellucci looked into the distance, very worried about what had happened yesterday evening and this afternoon. When the tailor was already getting into the carriage, Bellucci ran up to him, asking him to wait a little. The maid handed over a small suitcase. These are the things that Delia had forgotten. Marcelli was worried. Indeed, everything was fine with Bellucci. She had been very quiet today. The maid said that she was fine, and that the same should be conveyed to Delia, so that she would not worry. The next weekend in Marseille invited Bellucci to visit his boutique, so that his girlfriends wouldn't get too bored. In the silence of the night, Bellucci again thought about her fate and the people around her. The girl huddled on the bed. She had been living away from her mother for several weeks now. The reason there would be gold a day is because she thought it would make her a better liar. The girl sank deeper and deeper into her memories of her mother's cruel treatment. The next day, Bella did not return until the morning and did not speak to her daughter. Because Bellucci tasted delicious food without her, it seemed unfair to the woman. Why does the Baroness treat her daughter so tenderly? Why can't Bella treat her daughter the same way? The girl leaned over her knees. She buried her face in them, trying to hide from the outside world. The girl started crying. This world is too unfair to her. She just wants her mother's love, delicious food, and beautiful clothes. An unfamiliar voice interrupted her crying. Someone asked her about the reason for her tears. It turns out that the fair-haired thief has broken into the Boren estate. The girl looked at the stranger in shock. He had nothing to steal from her. The good-natured thief tried to calm the upset Bellucci. He succeeded because the girl was very surprised by the company. The fair-haired stranger sat on the windowsill and looked closely at the girl. Finally, Bellucci realized what was happening and demanded that the stranger give his name. The young man grabbed the girl by her fragile shoulders and pulled her closer to him. From his bosom, he took out a strange gold-colored bottle and uncorked it. He didn't want Bellucci to bother him, so he gave her a strange concoction from a bottle to drink. As soon as a few drops touched the girl's lips, her eyes began to close. Gradually, consciousness left the tiny, sleepy head. The stranger looked at the sleeping girl with some tenderness. The baby was completely relaxed, no longer noticing anything around her. The young man adjusted the blanket on the girl's bed, so that you wouldn't freeze tonight. He was going to leave through the window again, but there were no doors in the house, and Bellucci continued to sleep peacefully, no longer worrying about anything. So the girl slept peacefully all night under the influence of the potion. In the morning, she was awakened by the scream of another maid. The sudden awakening frightened Bellucci a little. The maid reported that something big had happened, and it was clear from the girl's face that she was panicking. Someone broke into the estate at night and stole the jewelry, but that's not the main problem now. Barun was angry that someone stole his things and ran away. Most likely, this is the work of the Silver Wolf, and who this Belucci is does not know, but the maid told her everything. The Silver Wolf is a very famous thief. He always breaks into the same place 3 times. All the aristocrats of the Imperium fear him. The first time he steals the most expensive thing in the house. The second time, something mentally important comes under attack. And the third time, he steals not only an important and expensive thing, but also the main family heirloom. But there are no more thefts. This thief is very strange. And as a sign of his distinction, the Silver Wolf leaves a wolf's fang in place of the stolen item, exactly the one that lies on the owner's palm. Belucci thought that it was possible to hide the things before he arrived, but it doesn't work that way. Otherwise, the thief wouldn't be so famous. No matter where you hide the thing, he will definitely find what he needs and take it without asking. The butler suggested that the Baron postpone the event, but he was against postponing the ball, which only happens once a year. In response, the Baron declared a state of emergency and ordered a 24-hour guard to be installed inside and outside the estate. Eliza felt that her secret dates were under threat, so she tried to put her father in jail. A nervous man yelled at his daughter. He thought that the girl was taking everything as a joke. This upset the little lady very much. Tears came to her eyes. She was obviously very angry with her father. The young lady ran out of the drawing room in tears, followed by her personal maid, Belucci. The Baron called the butler to him to sort out the incident. There was no feedback from Eliza's suitors. But in any case, first you need to understand the master's intentions. The Baron suspects that the Silver Wolf is here for his daughter, which did not go unnoticed by the butler. The Baron decided that he needed to find a husband for Eliza, who lived very far away, as soon as possible, so that the Silver Wolf could not get to her. The young lady's richly decorated bedroom no longer brought her peace. The girl was hanging a red ribbon on a branch near her balcony, nervously looking around. As the young lady was tying the bow, Belucci suddenly realized what it was. The maid had seen this tape before, but it took a lot of effort to remember where. And then a spark of memory lit up in her eyes. It was this ribbon that was hanging near the tree yesterday, before Adam arrived. Belucci quickly began to put the various facts together in her head. She remembered Adam saying that he hoped to see Eliza in blue today. Belucci distracted Madame Elisa from sending a secret message. The joyful maid announced her guests that this was a secret signal to Adam. On the day when there is no date, the ribbon is red, and when there is a meeting, it is blue. Belucci's correct guess only angered the Baron's daughter even more. The noble lady grabbed the maid by the throat, digging her nails into it. Elisa threatened Belucci that if her father found out about the dates, the maid would be sold at the slave market. Eliza's face was distorted into an ugly grimace of anger. All her prettiness was gone. Frightened, Belucci began to nod and agree with her cruel peer in tears. The lady threw Belucci to the floor with all her might, so that the girl would hit the floor harder. Belucci looked after her angry mistress, without understanding anything, and the maid had no intention of saying anything. Meanwhile, early evening descended on the city, and the sky was filled with sunshine. Marcel tiredly straightened his bangs. He had finished his next masterpiece. His best dress, worn by Delia to the ball in honor of Baron Milton's birthday, will be shown today. Delia considered the dress too bright and flashy, to which Marcel objected. In his opinion, Delia was the main heroine of the evening. The girl argued that the main person of the evening was Baron Milton. The girl exhaled indignantly and left, and Marcel asked her for forgiveness. Already standing at the door, Delia called out to the tailor in a demanding voice. The young man turned to the golden-haired girl's voice, embarrassed and frightened, responding to the call. The golden-haired angel, in the person of Delia, warmly thanked Marcel for his efforts. The smile and light of the young lady struck Marcel right to the heart. Delia felt like the Baron would definitely recognize her and kill her. Duchess Marie reassured the girl she would introduce Delia as her relative. It was Delia's first time at such a big birthday party, and she couldn't stop being amazed. The Countess laughed good-naturedly at the girl's reaction. Of course, this place is gorgeous. The golden-haired one heard whispers about Lady Chelsea, with whom she had arrived here. The crowd behind her shamed the Countess, calling her a cruel and merciless woman. According to rumors, even at her husband's funeral, the Countess did not shed a tear. Those around her believed that she killed the Earl of Chelsea. The woman pressed her lips tightly together. She was above all this stupid gossip. Delia looked at the Countess's tense figure with concern and some understanding. The Baron noticed Madame Marie's presence and thanked her for her visit. Noting Delia's familiar face, the Countess introduced Delia as her niece and asked her to greet the Baron politely. Neither the Baron nor the appraiser attached much importance to Delia, as the Countess had warned. Milton was even glad that his good friend had a niece the same age as Eliza. The Countess responded happily to this proposal, but Delia doubted whether it was a good thing that she was not recognized. The golden-haired girl's gaze caught on the creepy-looking frame, and the girl immediately remembered Marie's words about the importance of the gift. Why was there a torture instrument right at the entrance to the estate? The answer was simple: for the entertainment of the guests. Delia thought this was cruel, and she made sure to tell Baron Milton. The cruel man did not understand the girl's fears. He thinks that it is normal to use this frame, especially in response to those guests who brought worthless gifts. In any case, no one would die at first, so the Baron demanded to see the gift that the Countess of Chelsea had prepared. With a predatory smile, the Baron waited for the moment when he would be presented with the long-awaited gift. The Countess and Delia tensed under the man's frightening and crazy gaze. Hiding her fear, the Countess dispelled Baron Milton's doubts. She was confident that her gift would be worthy of his collection. The Baron's greedy eyes followed every movement of the gendarme who carried out the chest. The woman opened the lid of the chest, presenting the gift itself to the Baron's attention. The eyes of the Baron and the appraiser reflected disappointment and anger. Delia waited for the appraiser's final verdict, looking straight into his gopher eyes. The Baron stared blankly at the contents of the chest. He didn't understand what the hell the Countess had brought him. Inside the chest, there is a bust of the pharaoh, softly shimmering with gold. Graphia thought that the Baron liked it and began to tell what her gift was made of. The Baron interrupted the Countess in mid-sentence. He did not want to hear her out. He felt that the femme fatale was mocking him and his stupidity. The Countess had to take a step back. Otherwise, the Baron would have hit her. The Baron let out an angry cry. It's just some illiquid goods from an antique shop, which has been lying there for many, many years, and is not sold even for a pittance, because only Lady Chelsea goes to this shop. The Baron believed that the Countess was trying to deceive him when she said that the bust was cast from pure gold. At this point, Delia stepped in, calling Baron Milton's opinion hasty and unfounded. The golden-haired girl demanded that the appraiser look at the gift and only then draw conclusions. The appraiser doesn't just stand behind the Baron. Let him do his job. The appraiser was skeptical about the claim that the bust was made of gold, but agreed to verify it. Delia never doubted her knowledge and conclusions for a second, so she just waited for these snobs to understand. The appraiser asked the butler to bring a glass bottle containing a cloudy liquid from his bag. The Baron resisted the appraiser's actions, but was put down by the appearance of the butler. There is a very simple way to check whether there is gold in front of them or not. The appraiser began to pour liquid on the bust. The professional's attentive gaze monitored the slightest changes in the condition of the gift. The bust continues to shine, no matter how much liquid the appraiser pours on it. Baron Milton asked the appraiser to explain what he was doing, and it turned out that the worker was using vinegar as a special reagent. Gold is considered the best precious metal because no matter how much it suffers, it does not lose its original shine. If the Countess and Delia had brought a fake, it would certainly have faded. But this did not happen. The vinegar did not change the color of the bust even a little bit, and did not affect the quality at all. Delia expected this, so she was absolutely calm and inert, like that very gold. The appraiser came to the final conclusion that the gift was indeed made of pure gold, which instantly changed the Baron's mood. In terms of money, the gift cost about 1,000 gold coins. This surprised the Baron very much. At first, he did not even believe the generosity of the Countess. But Marie continued by saying that her gift was valuable not only for its gold. The headdress is decorated with blue lapis lazuli and topaz. The collar, as a separate masterpiece, consists of rubies and obsidian. Now this can be considered a gift worthy of Baron Milton. The Baron looked at the Earl of Chelsea's wife in shock and could not find the right words. It is now his favorite gift of all that he has ever received. As he expected, the Earl of Chelsea's wife had the most attentive gaze in the entire Imperium. The Baron demanded that the guests come to the celebration as soon as possible so that they could rest. The Baron prepared a lot of delicacies and alcohol for his dear guests, so the Countess and Delia can have as much fun as their hearts desire. On the day of buying the gift, even the Countess did not believe Delia. The bust was covered in dust, and had been standing in the shop for as long as Marie could remember. Marie reminded once again that if you give a bad gift, you can suffer greatly. Delia listened calmly to the woman's concerns, knowing exactly what to say. Delia slyly asked what the bust might be made of, and the Countess of Chelsea suggested that, judging by its weight, it was lead. Like a bolt from the blue, Delia's words that the bust was made of gold struck the Countess's thoughts. Delia revealed that the top was made of gold and lapis lazuli, and the collar parts were made of ruby and obsidian. The Countess did not believe the girl's words. If this bust had been really expensive, it would not have rotted in an antique shop for many years. Delia, with a sly grin, calmly argued with the Countess. It was just that, due to ignorance, no one noticed this value. They snatched such a treasure for only 500 iron coins. If the owner had known that the bust was gold, he would never have set such a worthless price. Delia was only glad of this. Otherwise, the material in the bust alone would have been worth several thousand gold coins. The seller received very little because he was a fool and did not know the true price. If people knew what this value was, there would certainly be a fight for it. And those who recognize a diamond in glass in time do not have to pay the full price. All the lady has to do is clean this stop and put it in a nice box. If there is an appraiser there, a decent appraiser, he will quickly determine that this is real gold. Already at the banquet, the Countess asked Delia. There were many other gift options, which is why Delia chose this particular bust. Delia thought for a moment, but began her triad, which she had begun in the Countess's office. There are values that do not change with the times. No matter how many decades pass, they will still be worth the same. So the choice was obvious. If there is no bust, then nothing. Diamonds, emeralds, and rubies are always expensive. The value of a piece of art varies from person to person, and it is not always easy to immediately estimate the cost. And gold is valued in any era. No matter how the world changes, greedy snobs will not forget the price of gold. For the Countess, everything began to become more and more interesting and tempting. Where does such a young person get knowledge worthy of the highest minds of the country? She even notices how often she uses abstruse words. It feels like Delia herself has experienced more than one era in life. The cry distracted the Countess of Chelsea from her thoughts about Delia's fate and her affairs. The girl and the woman turned around at the scream. Delia dropped the glass filled with champagne from her hands. The scream came from the main entrance, where the Countess and Delia headed. The golden-haired girl ran to the Baron. She was very worried by the unfamiliar cry, filled with suffering. Milton smiled good-naturedly and waved at the girl. He sweetly informed her that the ladies were late for the show. Near the entrance stood the same frame, but it was already covered in blood and dirt. Delia was afraid that this device had been used to kill someone without trial or investigation. The Baron just laughed, reminding him that this thing wouldn't kill a person. It would just scratch him a little. Someone received a return gift from the Baron for bringing a terrible gift last year and this year. The Baron was already impatient to start celebrating, but Duke Sullivan still had not arrived. The Baron dismissed the news. Sullivan would be empty-handed anyway, so there was no point in waiting for him. Delia was very displeased with Baron Milton's attitude towards his own guests and people in general. The young lady asked the Baron to slow down before heading inside the estate. Delia did not disdain to ask the nobleman what had upset him so much about the gift, that the man who brought it had been tortured. The man looked at the girl deceptively calmly and answered her question. The Baron heeded the girl's request and turned to her. If everyone found out that he didn't like her, it would be boring. After all, Baron Milton wants to enjoy the kicks and pain of people every year. Delia doesn't like this cruel man at all, who is ready to do anything for his ego. A familiar voice distracted Delia from her heavy thoughts. Duke Sullivan had arrived and was surprised to see Countess of Chelsea here. The Duke became interested in who the golden-haired lady was next to the Countess. She seemed vaguely familiar to him. Delia tried to pretend that she didn't know either the Duke or herself. Sullivan insisted that they had met before, and he wanted to know the truth. The girl looked away and pretended to be a rag and didn't show off. In that case, the Duke decided to introduce himself. He didn't know that the Countess of Chelsea had such a sweet niece. Delia was glad that the Duke did not recognize her, and she attributed the fact that no one knew about her existence to her dislike of communicating with people. The Duke was careful that the girl's lack of love would not prevent her from having fun this evening. Countess Marie asked the Duke of the Salon to stay a little longer. She had a couple of questions for him. Okay. The lady asked the Duke to talk to her alone. This issue needs to be resolved personally between them. The Countess started talking about a round wooden pendant that the Duke had once picked up. The Countess had heard that the Duke had once brought this pendant to the owner of an antique shop, so she became interested in the matter. And it seems that the pendant that the Duke now keeps was recently lost by her in the square. The Duke, of course, was surprised by the Countess's knowledge, but he did not resist. The Countess would like to have him back if possible. She believes in Sullivan's good nature. According to Chelsea's League, the pendant is very important to her, so she asks to give it to her. However, the Duke looked up with his red eyes and brazenly lied that he knew nothing. Delia, who had been overhearing this conversation, was outraged at what a jerk Duke Sullivan was. The Duchess was sure she had heard the Duke asking the shopkeeper about this pendant. The Duke did indeed pick up a wooden pendant, but he is not at all sure that this is the piece of jewelry the Countess is looking for. Then, how could the Countess describe the appearance of this pendant? And how could the Duke understand that they were talking about the same thing? The Countess insisted that the clone was indeed hers, and asked for it to be returned immediately. The Duke decided to tell the truth about this pendant just in case. He is well aware of who the true owner of this pendant is, and it is clearly not Lady Chelsea. The Duke will not give her what is not his, just because she demands it from him directly. The Countess awkwardly covered her face with her fan, worried about his reaction. And Delia, at that moment, bared her teeth angrily. Once again, the Duke had interfered with all her plans. If that was all, then the Duke wished to go indoors. Why did the Countess not resist? As soon as Sullivan disappeared, the Countess turned to the girl and asked her forgiveness for the fact that nothing worked out. It is very difficult to communicate with the Duke. The Countess is confident that there is no one in the entire empire who could treat Duke Sullivan impolitely. Even bastards like Baron Milton don't like to meet the Duke. There were a lot of beautiful, cheerful people on the floor, and also delicious treats from sweet donuts to spicy meats. There is basically no point in coming to the ball now. Milton turned out to be much more disgusting than the girl thought. The woman's cries made the girl distract herself from her thoughts. The young ladies crowded around Duke Sullivan and begged him to dance with them. Apparently, Duke Sullivan is popular with the ladies. Even noblewomen holding a higher title than him find it difficult to interact with him. Why did her pendant end up with such a nasty person as he is? She has no more ideas except to rush to him to take her pendant back, and her neck might end up being twisted before she gets to Sullivan. Well, she's still glad that Duke Sullivan didn't recognize her while she was dressed in rich clothes. But what's interesting is, where is Bellucci, who is supposed to still be working here? Why isn't she visible among the other servants? A stranger approached the bored girl and greeted her kindly. The golden-haired woman noticed a familiar voice, or the outline of a figure. She had already met this person. Recognition lit up her eyes. This was the same thief she had met on the very first day. The young man also recognized Delia, and was also very surprised to see her in such a place. The girl decided to clarify who was in front of her, and the young man confirmed that they had met before. Delia was really confused. She already doubted that she had met this guy before. The fair-haired youth asked for the young lady's hand. He suggested that she think about it while they danced. The young man gently pressed the girl to his chest and smoothly ran his hand over her neck. Such a tender relationship made the girl very confused, but she felt the familiar scent of vanilla. This scent made her finally understand who she had met. She looked up and settled into the familiar young man's face. Well, he is definitely that very thief. That very thief of women's hearts. The young man confirmed that he was indeed the thief, but not a simple criminal. He is a silver wolf, a legendary thief who is the stuff of legends. The silver wolf visits the same place 3 times. The first time he steals the most expensive, the second the most important, and the third the most valuable for the owner, no matter whether it is an object or a person. No matter how well what interests him is hidden, he will definitely find it and privatize it. As he said, he only steals women's hearts and souls. Delia was embarrassed, but the young man continued. The local nobles live in majestic castles and wear flashy clothes, and there's a lot of wine and food that they can't even eat. Is it fair that only a small part of society has all this? And the silver wolf simply returns all the things to where they were dragged from by the nobles. Delia compared him to Robin Hood, which made him rise in her estimation. The girl called the young man a noble thief, which sounded more pleasant. The girl continued to listen attentively to her friend and conduct a dialogue with him, where the girl repeated the young man's words that all things should be returned to their place. The young man confirmed this. No matter what the thing is, it must be screwed in by the owner. Delia asked the noble thief to do her a favor. She needs him to return one thing to her. The noble thief became interested in who stole her thing. The words that it was Duke Sullivan greatly surprised the Silver Wolf. The young man became interested in what had been stolen from her. Delia replied that it was her pendant. It may seem insignificant. It is not hers. It is very important. It is a wooden pendant with the sun in the center, surrounded by the phases of the moon, where men are kept until the next full moon. The Silver Wolf demanded a reward for his actions. Delia offered to give everything in money. The new thieves did not need this. The girl lied that she was going to give him a mask made of pure gold. The young man replied that his talent could not be bought for meaningless money. He was already bathing in gold. In this case, the girl agreed to pay him at his request. She is ready to offer him one of her talents. The fair-haired young man was pleasantly surprised by the woman's self-confidence. The Silver Wolf accepted the golden-haired person's request. At this time, the Countess was watching the dance of Delia and the Silver Wolf. The woman looked attentively at the calm and even condescending face of the noble young man, and she looked at every emotional wrinkle on the tender girl's face. The Countess of Chelsea noted that Delia and the noble young man looked very, very good together. The Countess was distracted from her pleasant thoughts by the voice of Duke Sullivan. Sullivan asked permission to keep the woman company, to which the Countess of course agreed, moving slightly to the side. An awkward silence fell between the Countess and the Duke, both of them watching the dance of Delia and the wolf intently. The Duke asked what Marie was doing, and she calmly replied that she was watching young love. She asked Sullivan to look directly at the budding couple. The Duke turned his gaze exactly where the Countess asked. Delia and he really look so cute together. They are a perfect couple. While the Countess was speaking, she did not even notice that Duke Sullivan had fallen into a stupor. The man stared at the dancing couple, or rather, at the girl's face, and Delia herself finally found the one she had been looking for all evening, and the one she had been worried about all week. Bellucci was among the other servants, diligently helping at this banquet. The dark-haired girl rushed around among the noble persons like a mad bee. Delia called out to her friend happily, and the wolf let her go with a heavy sigh. The golden-haired girl, of course, wanted to talk a little more with her new colleague, but she didn't have time. She would like to first decide on the date of the next meeting and the specific payment. The young man heeded the girl's request and turned to her, again directing his attention to the golden-haired girl. He wrapped his arm around the girl's tender hand and said that there was no need for a contract. He will be able to find Delia anywhere, no matter where she is or where she is hiding. The girl was of course embarrassed by such a statement from a guy she barely knew, but she didn't have time to answer him. The silver shelf now appeared as unexpectedly as it had, leaving behind only a light hint of vanilla scent. Those around her admired Lady Eliza's outfit. It was a beautiful silk dress. The girl walked proudly around the room and boasted that this dress was bought in the famous cartoon by Marcel. It's hard to get an appointment with him now, so everyone would like to be in her place. Bellucci noticed Adam to the side, who was completely oblivious to his beloved. People around her said that the status of the young daughter of a baron really wanted to be on a different level. Eliza bathed in the adoration and envy of other noblewomen, until she noticed her Adam next to the maid. She was very angry that her boyfriend dared to flirt with a stupid simpleton. The young man begged the maid for her schedule and days off. He clearly had his eye on her. The baron's daughter approached this cute couple, which greatly frightened and surprised Adam. Suddenly, Adam threw a glass of wine at the girl, showering the girl with glass fragments and dirt. The baron's daughter's beautiful, expensive dress was utterly ruined, and the girl watched as wine spilled over her skirt. The incredibly expensive and beautiful dress can't be saved now. Without waiting for an order, Bellucci urgently ran for a rag to clean her mistress's dress. They wanted to have time to remove traces of the incident before Lady Eliza's mother arrived, but they didn't have time. The woman arrived just in time to see how dire the situation was. Eliza turned around in fear in the direction of her mother's voice, and then pretended that it wasn't him, and the house wasn't his. The Baroness went to so much trouble to get this dress so that her daughter would be the most special young lady here. But now that the board is damaged, she cannot appear before people in this form. The Baron will be giving a speech soon, so she should quickly change her clothes to attend her father's monologue. The woman turned away from her daughter in disappointment. She came to the conclusion that such dresses were not suitable for such problematic girls. Eliza's mother's words hurt her deeply, so she quickly shifted the blame away from herself. Eliza complained that some ill-wishers had deliberately doused her. Then the Baroness became very angry and demanded that the person who did this to her daughter's dress be handed over. Eliza quickly ran her eyes over the people nearby, choosing a victim. Adam had already turned away at this point, not wanting to have the slightest point of contact with the Baroness. The girl grinned crookedly, trying to hide her disappointment in her fiancé. She put all the blame on the oblivious Belluccis, who were only trying to do their job. The maid tried to clear her reputation. She would never have dared to do something like that. But the Baroness, of course, believed her daughter, so she looked at the girl conditionally. Bellucci grabbed the hem of her young mistress's dress. She begged the lady and Eliza to tell her mother the whole truth. But the Baron's daughter only slapped the maid's hands. She wasn't even going to think about such a thing. According to Elisa, it was Bellucci who ruined her dress out of jealousy. She was accused of lying to save her own skin. Therefore, the Baroness was offered to sell her as a slave. This girl was not capable of anything more. Delia approached the unfolding scene. I am more and more amazed at the ignorance of this family. House Milton actually sells its maids into slavery without even fully understanding the situation. However, it is more terrible to work for them. A thankless task. If you make the slightest mistake, you will be sold into slavery. Eliza didn't even listen to the poor girl's explanations. The argument was interrupted by the butler's announcement. The Baron's speech was about to begin, so the girl hurried out to the people, paid for the pink wine, and unnoticed. In fact, the Baron's daughter was afraid of responsibility and hurried to get away from the golden-haired girl's blow as quickly as possible. Delia immediately began to help her friend get up from the floor. She was very worried about her. Bellucci grabbed her friend's hand for support. She didn't do anything. She didn't touch Miss Eliza's dress at all. It really wasn't her fault. Bellucci continued to make excuses to the one who was already on her side. The golden-haired one gently hugged her friend and hid her face in her clothes. The girls stepped aside to talk. Delia was disappointed and shocked that Bellucci wanted to stay and work there. This is a place of violence without reason, tears, and hatred. The golden-haired one, of course, respects her friend's choice, but to consider it really stupid. She tried to convince Bellucci, but she refused to even listen to her friend, citing the fact that the golden-haired one did not understand anything. Bella threw chairs and bottles at her daughter, so Lady Eliza's spankings are useless. Bellucci's mother makes her work even without food, and the Baroness is always interested in her health. Bellucci may be clumsy, but she knows her place. She is not as smart and quick-witted as Delia, so she cannot even dream of what the golden-haired one has. For Bellucci, it is enough to stay in this place and work properly. Delia sat down next to her friend and began to remember their first meeting. Delia could have starved to death because the other girls were being mean, but Bellucci came along and helped her. Bellucci is a wonderful person, so she, like other good people, deserves to be happy. As for knowing one's place, that's all nonsense. Bellucci shouldn't think about it. Unexpectedly, Bellucci asked about a certain dragon that was legendary throughout the country. Delia repeated her friend's words, smiling cheerfully and winking at her. Delia was referring to a mythical animal that flies through the sky and changes the weather. The golden-haired one asked about the baby dragon, which Bellucci no longer knew. Dragons that are not yet able to fly are called hatchlings. Deli wanted to share with her friend a line from a novel she really liked. A baby that sees rain clouds may never stay in the pond. The baby dragon from the famous legend needs a lot of water to become a real dragon, but he got stuck in a pond full of mud. And no matter how hard the cub wanted to, he could not become a dragon without water, so he hid deeply out of shame. Outwardly, he was no different from the fish, but then suddenly a rain cloud appeared, and as soon as the pouring rain began, the cub emerged from the pond in the form of a dragon. Delia took her friend's hand and compared her to this very dragon, who was yet to soar into the sky. Bellucci can be a dragon waiting for rain or a dirty fish swimming in a musty pond. Someday the dragon may leave the pond, but the dirty fish never will. It's Bellucci's choice to be a dragon or a dirty fish, and the golden-haired one doesn't reproach her for anything. Delia asked if Bellucci really understood everything she had just told her. It was a little difficult for the maid to understand all this, but she knows how much her friend cares for them. So she smiled happily and asked for forgiveness for her stupidity and despondency. The golden-haired one said that the student was stupid and knew too much for his age. The conversation between the friends was interrupted by one of the maids of the Harrow house. Bellucci needed to get to work. The friends, as always, parted warmly and promised to meet again in the boutique in Marseille. Already in the Countess's carriage, what kind of relationship does Marie have with the man she was dancing with? This question confused the young lady a little. The golden-haired one did not understand why the Countess needed this information. Was this young man her boyfriend? No, they were just dancing, the young lady replied. This disappointed the Countess of Chelsea, which did not escape the attention of the golden-haired girl. It turns out that from the moment she saw them dancing, she imagined their future as a young family. The Duchess happily imagined it out loud. They would have very beautiful babies. Delia claimed that there was absolutely nothing between them, so even dreaming about something was stupid. The carriage arrived at Marcel's boutique, but the light inside was not on. It frightened and confused the golden-haired girl. She had nowhere else to go. The girl jumped out of the carriage and ran to the note hanging on the wall. Marcel asked his golden-haired friend for forgiveness. He had urgent matters to attend to. He left some of her things at the hotel. The password she needs to give at the hotel is the name of the dress I'm wearing now. Already at the hotel, the girl began to talk with the owner. She did not expect that Marcel would so generously leave her here. Even the Countess was shocked by the number of bags and boxes. There were more than 24 of them. Delia was worried that Marcel had moved it all himself, but one of the workers refuted his suspicions. Several large men brought everything here. They were muscular, tall, very strong. Neither the Marseille nor the tavern owner even lifted a finger. This statement only frightened the golden-haired girl even more. It was not safe to be in the hotel right now. Therefore, the Countess demanded that the golden-haired one stay with her for the night. The girl did not refuse Lady Chelsea's offer and left with her. Already in bed, Delia continued to think about Marcel's last words. The young man promised that he would never lie to her, and in principle, he did not lie, but at least he could have told her where he was going. In the morning, Lady Chelsea's maids were at a loss for words. The golden-haired one looked like a little princess, or even more like a sweet strawberry fairy flying on cute fluffy wings. Morsel was indeed serious about clothes, but he seriously gave her more than 50 dresses. The golden-haired woman asked where the Countess of Chelsea was and received a message that she was expected in the drawing room. As Delia approached the door to the living room, she heard from the sounds of dialogue that the Countess was greeting a guest. The golden-haired girl was delighted. She hoped that it was Marcel who had returned, but as soon as the doors opened, the figure of Duke Sullivan appeared before her. I definitely didn't want to see any humor, so I sat down in the offered seat, disappointed. She noted that the Countess and Duke were having a good time together and was about to leave. But the Duke stopped her, because it was now breakfast time, and the lady needed to gain strength. The girl tried to slip away, arguing that she should not interfere in adult conversations. The Duke didn't actually want to meet the Countess of Chelsea today. He's here to see her. This greatly shocked the commoner. She certainly didn't expect this. Delia asked Duke Sullivan if he really wanted to see her. The Duke asked if what the Countess of Chelsea had told him about Delia was true, namely that she had a great understanding of art and design. The Duke recently recruited new soldiers and expanded the training ground. Now Sullivan wanted to get the landfill properly done and wanted Delia to do it. Delia was surprised by this order and announced that she did not want to do it. Sullivan replied that his refusal did not upset Delia in the least, but Lady Chelsea may experience many inconveniences due to Delia's refusal. The girl was afraid for the named aunt, but could not understand how her refusal could harm her. Lady Chelsea decided to explain everything to Delia in detail. The lady said that in recent years, people have begun to leave Baron Merton's estate due to high taxes. The Baron's lands adjoin the Chelsea lands, so they all stayed with her. But recently, the Baron declared that the lady should not dare to keep people who had fled from the Baron. Delia wondered why her aunt was worried about the Baron and his people. The fact that people were leaving the Baron was only his problem. Chelsea replied that she was an aristocrat of the Imperium and could not leave people homeless. Her heart was breaking with compassion for their problems. The lady asked other aristocrats for help, but they all refused. Chesley assumed that they all just didn't want to get involved with Merton. Only now the poor people had nowhere to go. The lady looked at the Duke with gratitude and said that only he dared to settle the fugitives from the Baron's lands in his house. Delia remembered the map she had seen in the store. The map clearly showed that the baronial lands were located above the lands of Duke Sullivan. Ivushka remembered exactly that the barony and the duchy did not have a common border, but were located very close to Libertà and Gloria. Then the girl remembered something important. The Baron complained to her about a great injustice from his point of view. People, according to the Baron, are fleeing from Gloria to the Imperium, and the Baron doesn't like this. Delia realized that the Baron had deceived her, and that the refugees who had flooded the capital were not from Gloria. Delia asked Lady Chelsea if she had guessed correctly that all the refugees were from the Baron's lands. It turned out that the girl was absolutely right, but she didn't understand at all how her refusal would affect her aunt, Lady Chelsea. Sullivan announced that if Delia refused, he would no longer allow people who had fled from the Baron into the capital. Lady Chelsea turned pale and pressed her lips together. Delia glared at the insolent Sullivan. The Duke continued to say that other countries would not accept fugitives, and they would not be allowed into Gloria as they had dishonored themselves, and they were too poor to go to Pecunia. Sullivan believed that the refugees would have to wander the world without a roof over their heads for the rest of their lives, since their homeland had disowned them. There are a few places where they could live, either the lands of wanderers, where lawlessness reigns, or Liberta, where monsters live. They can also go to Pruina, where eternal cold and ice reign for the cold and hungry dead. Another option is to consider Harine, a hot desert where sandstorms never cease. Delia chuckled. Did Sullivan really equate human lives with decoration on some kind of training ground? The Duke replied that if Delia accepted his offer, then everything would be fine. There was nothing complicated or offensive in his request, so why was she resisting so vigorously? The Duke even begins to think that Delia is simply trying to avoid communicating with him. Delia said she had a counter-question about why he was asking her about this. It was weird. Sullivan chuckled and replied that he found it odd that it was his Lady Chelsea who was asking for a favor. And what is no less strange is that suddenly the lady's niece appears, incredibly similar to the girl he is looking for. It seemed to the Duke that there were too many coincidences, so many that he no longer believed that they were coincidences. Sullivan decided to personally verify that all his suspicions were justified. Delia jumped up from her chair, her eyes full of anger and disappointment. The girl turned away and clenched her fists. Lady Chesley was afraid that the girl would do something irreparable. The Duke grinned smugly. Sullivan was quite confident that Delia would agree. The girl turned around abruptly and declared that she wanted the Duke to take her to the training ground. Sullivan was kind enough to take Delia there himself. An incredibly beautiful building, similar to a palace, appeared before the girl. Delia asked where Sullivan had taken her. Perhaps it was the Emperor's palace, but in fact it was the Duke's estate. Delia asked the Duke why he had decided to expand the range. Sullivan replied that there were rumors of suspicious people appearing in all countries of the continent, so he needed to be prepared for anything. The world would not last forever. The prolonged calm had turned his soldiers into smug and pompous fellows. Delia asked if the Duke's knights really thought that the lack of war was a reason not to train, but they could be understood. Sullivan replied that strength can always be put to good use, if, of course, a person strives for perfection. The girl agreed that this was quite logical. During the conversation, the young people came to the training ground, where the Duke's knights were marching. Delia recognized old acquaintances among them, called out to them, and asked how things were going with them. Horror gripped the hearts of the brave warriors. The knights bowed their heads before the noble lady whom they had once insulted. One of the guys suggested that she was here because of that incident. The captain prepared for severe punishment. However, the peaceful appearance of the Duke and the girl next to him did not promise anything bad. The knights decided that the two looked too peaceful and friendly. The boys whispered to each other, hoping that they would get away with it and not be punished. Delia looked back and winked at them, informing them that they would have to come with her. The captain and his subordinates again felt some excitement. Delia said that the Duke should remain inside while she prepared everything. She would send for him when everything was finished. Delia ordered several knights to follow her. The girl came to an antique shop she knew well. The owner was glad to see her. Delia remembered the Duke's words, that strength will always find a worthy use if a person wants to improve. Delia pointed to several items on display in the shop and asked if they were for sale. The owner confirmed that all these items are for sale. But how is the girl going to take all this away? The owner is very strong, but even he cannot move this thing. Delia reassured the shopkeeper and stated that she was not alone today. The knights delivered the goods chosen by Delia to the Duke's palace. Delia praised them for their work, but the knights lay there exhausted. So heavy was their burden this time. The guys were even scared to think that they were carrying something so heavy. The Duke hoped that the item that had arrived at his residence was worth the fact that his soldiers were so tired. Delia asked the Duke to gather all his soldiers here. Soon, all of Duke Sullivan's knights, without exception, were standing around the mysterious thing. Delia commanded that the blanket be removed. Duke Sullivan was no more surprised by what he saw than his knights. An unusual statue without a head or arms appeared before them. Delia asked the Duke if he liked the statue. Duke Sullivan was confused by the fact that the statue was missing some body parts, but Delia pointed out to the Duke that it did not matter. It is this type of sculpture that allows you to look at real historical masterpieces with genuine interest. You can imagine the missing parts yourself. This statue was created many years ago on an island that is very far from the continent of Finist. It is believed that the statue was erected to celebrate the victory and was restored by the descendants of those people who were descendants of the victors. And the name of this statue is the Goddess of Victory, who brings good luck. One of the knights angrily shouted at the golden-haired girl. Her words were once again perceived as a lie. The ignorant knight could not believe that such an ugly thing could be the Goddess of Victory. Even if I thought so in the past, now the statue of the Summerhead has no arms, so it's all a lie. It would be the same as if they were faced with a battle without a head and arms. In other words, death. Why did they decide to erect this decadent sculpture in the center of the training ground? The knights perceived the statue as an insult. The knights demanded that this statue be removed from here immediately. They decided that it would bring misfortune. Even if she is the supposed goddess of victory, her depressing appearance is unsettling. This statue is not here simply because the analysis opens the door to victory, tried to stop the men of Delia. The pretty girl in the pink dress was still able to impress the crowd of fighting knights. The goddess is known throughout the world, so she grants her blessing to knights in battle. But that is not the true reason for her presence here. First, the golden-haired one wants to ask the knights, and in the impressions of the statue in this one, she asks to think carefully about what wealth is trying to do. Delia turned to the first knight she came across, who was simply standing behind her, and the girl demanded that he describe what the statue was trying to do. She reassured the man that she wasn't expecting a specific answer from him, just the first thing that came to mind when he looked at her crazy. The man began to voice his thoughts. He simply described the pose in which the statue stands. The chest is baked, and one leg is put forward. The knight was of course not sure, but it turned out that the statue was trying to move forward. It seemed that was exactly what it was doing. Another knight answered the same question by saying that the statue looked like an angel who had descended from heaven. The next knight compared the statue to a general leading his army into battle and to victory. The bald knight reported that the statue's wings were spread wide, as if it was about to take off. Another man felt as if the statue was trying to resist the pull of the earth. Delia thanked the knights for sharing their impressions of the beautiful work of art. It doesn't matter whether I think this is not her goddess of victory or not. There is no way to prove which point of view. There is no way to know how the statue was restored or what historical value it has in its current location. But the golden-haired one sees that no one present here now thought that the statue expressed defeat or fear. The knights feel only the efforts of the statue, which it makes to step forward, to descend, or perhaps to fly into the sky. Delia feels like the knights see the statue as their leader, who is ready to help them fight against the enemy troops. Even if the statue has no head or arms, all knights feel that it leads them to victory. The rest of us must work hard enough to become as brave as this statue and be ready to go head-on, and even without body parts. They must have the courage to not disgrace their fellow knights. Fortitude comes with skill, and mastery can only be achieved through hard work. Delia hopes they will remind themselves of this every morning when they go out to practice. If the knights diligently focus on their training, then there will come a day when their brave souls will become stronger than this statue. This is the reason why Duke Sullivan expanded this training ground for the knights, because giving such a large training ground to a bunch of weak-willed soldiers would be completely pointless. The Duke looked at the little girl with a new gaze, and once again saw a wise goddess in the treatment of the little fairy. The knights immediately perked up and began chanting thanks to the Duke and the golden-haired beauty. Delia called out to the Duke in the confusion, who had to turn his gaze from his men to his escort. Delia, shooting her eyes at the guy with satisfaction, had already managed to prove the value of this statue to the knights. Will she prove with words that she is exactly the stupid peasant woman he is looking for? The Duke immediately found something to answer the golden-haired man. Even if the peasant is good at making speeches, he can never be so full of dignity. To his surprise, the Duke admitted his mistake. The golden-haired woman was not just a peasant. He politely knelt down and asked forgiveness for the disrespect he had shown, and still dares to hope for a generous forgiveness. Delia asked the Duke with displeasure what the peasant had done to deserve such a suspicious attitude towards herself. Duke Sullivan brushed aside the golden-haired man's questions, saying that the young lady didn't need to know about it. Delia continued to insist on her own. The Duke pulled her breath, so she had a right to know the reason. She is very interested in why the Duke is looking for her. Maybe it is because she stepped on his cloak or was conducting illegal business. Or maybe because of the pendant that the wolf will soon return to her. She just needs a reason to never see the Duke again. Sullivan's answer greatly frightened the girl, since the peasant woman, in Sullivan's opinion, was a witch. Do witches really exist? This is nonsense and myths. But Sullivan brushed off these words and was about to leave the girl's company. The golden-haired one didn't let the Duke go so easily. She needed normal and clear explanations. If threats and persuasion don't work, then you need to use other tactics. The girl attracted the Duke's attention in a way that a nobleman could not afford to ignore. He can't leave her here because she's too tired to go home on her own. The knights looked in shock at the scene unfolding before them. They didn't even know what to expect. Duke Sullivan politely thanked the girl for her escort and invited her to go home. Delia insisted that she didn't have the strength to go back home, so she was going to spend the night here. These words made the knights drop their jaws to the ground. Not every lady has such impudence. I stood directly in front of the statue, Delia and the Duke, and there was an oppressive tension growing between them. The Duke politely began to refuse. Apart from the maids, there had never been any women in his estate, so he could not accept the golden-haired one. Aggressive Delia stood her ground. Sullivan made her run all day. She didn't even have time to have a proper snack. She did as he asked, and came here to fulfill his request. But he did not even offer her a cup of tea, which was very impolite on his part. The Duke was thinking about something. On the one hand, it was really impolite to greet a guest like that, but on the other hand, he had enough problems of his own. Sullivan argued that inviting guests to spend the night in a room without proper preparation was even more impolite. In the matter, she turned to the coachman, hinting that he was also very tired, and did not let him get a word in edgewise. Goldenhair is very, very tired today, and the coachman feels exactly the same. The servant had no choice but to agree with the young lady's words and play along with her. The golden-haired one can no longer ride in the carriage today, and the Duke does not want her to walk all the way back. But all the arguments of the young lady were ignored by the man with the hello eyes. The Duke silently turned around and walked away, leaving the screaming girl behind him. The knights smugly thought that Delia was about to retreat, because thousands of women had tried to invite themselves to the Duke's estate, but none had succeeded. The Duke's heart and houses are inaccessible to young ladies. When the Duke entered the hall, he was met by two maids who were setting the table. The Duke surprised them by demanding that more lamps be hung, because the hall looked too gloomy. The first maid dropped a porcelain plate on the floor, and the pieces shattered into pieces. The second one broke the tea set, which she was carrying on a tray at that moment. The butler adjusted his monocle in shock. The Duke hadn't changed anything in his estate for many years, and then such changes. And yet the Duke brought Delia with him, who began to greet all the servants of this wonderful house in a hostess-like manner.